Here we are, and I got the. It's gonna be the TikTok chat over top of the Twitch one. Yeah, this should have access to everything. Just need to wait for people to join on in, and then we should be good. Yo, what's up? What's up? New theme for the day. New theme for the day. That's what's up. Gonna wait a minute, and then we're gonna start it. So that's what's up. I'm gonna notify Twitch real quick. Announcements. What's up? Hello. How's everyone doing today so far? See what's going on with this category and if this actually works well. Did I just start streaming? Like just now, yeah. Yeah, I just started a live. That's what you're talking about. Hello, Effa. Thank you for the heart, me and the popular vote. Appreciate that. Trying to get a couple people in here before we start things off for the day. So that's what's up. Also, let me know if anything quality-wise or anything else is going wrong. We'll get it fixed as soon as we possibly can. That's staying for a long while. I say hi. All right, no worries. Appreciate you. All right, I guess we'll just start, because why not? Whatever. I'm basically going to be kind of reviewing this and seeing where I would answer differently than him or even the other people. Just like straight up reviewing this. Just because I've looked at it and I've seen clips of it on TikTok and I'm just curious about it.
Dr. Jordan Peterson. I'm a clinical psychologist, a professor emeritus at the University of Toronto, an author, a podcaster, public speaker, and today I'm surrounded by 25 atheists.
25. I was thinking it was 20 for some reason, but I guess that makes sense.
My first claim, atheists reject God, but they don't understand what they're rejecting.
Good afternoon, Dr. Peterson.
How are you doing?
So this claim here that atheists don't know what they're rejecting. My background is in studying to become a traditional Catholic priest, daily mass, daily rosary, going on long retreats, deep into the magisterium and biblical hermeneutics, like I was thoroughly in it. And it seems like I do know what I'm missing. Is there something that I missed over years of study, both this issue formally and living out religion so deeply?
Well, you obviously feel that you missed something when you were practicing for the priesthood. Your aim was off then. So
And
there's
so-
always the possibility that it's still off now.
What was off about my aim in the first place?
I don't know. That might take a long time to figure out. But
Then it seems
It's just such an interesting question because he comes at this and like explains his situation, but he doesn't explain like anything of like why he left it or like anything like this. Like, I don't know this man. I don't know where he went off, where it was wrong. Like, it's such a terrible way for coming up with an argument or even a debate because you're basing this off of a personal situation. And it's not based off of any actual evidence of anything being innately wrong or anything. Like, he's not stating, like, oh, I know this about God, and I'm, like, very... Like, he doesn't have the basis to understand the full grasp of what God is beyond the literal, because he said he studied and everything. He doesn't have the feeling there. Like, there just seems to be no feeling, no actual understanding of a Godhead in his sense, because he's, like, rejected it. He's like, yeah, well... I studied this, that, and the other. Well, I went to Catholic school, Catholic church. I don't like the church. Rejecting the church is not rejecting God. So it's just
kind of like this no true Scotsman type of fallacy in which you're the arbiter of people's aims and how they understand those aims to be. How is it that you can claim that people don't know something that you know about their life despite not having met them?
well, it's obviously a generic claim, just like the atheists claim that
it's just a funny claim because he says, he's like, well, how do you put this onto someone else that there is a God when you don't know anything about a person? It's the same thing as saying, well, there's a sun, there is this, there's that. Basing yourself off of the evidence that there is realistically something here versus something not is not subjective. It is not. It's an objective truth. This is just an interesting argument that he's trying to
There's
put
no
up.
God as
Yeah.
a generic claim.
It's not a
In your
generic
case,
claim.
it would have to be specified more, and I'm not claiming to understand what was going on in your mind, but
Yeah.
my experience with atheists is twofold. Is that they have a very reductive notion of what constitutes God, let's say in the Judeo-Christian tradition, and they've often been hurt by someone who was religious or by the religious enterprise or perhaps by God himself, so to speak, and that's left
Yeah.
them with an animus.
But I think that you have a reductive view of what atheism is. You've defined religion so broadly to include any sort of having aim in life, any sort of cultural archetypes, or having a metaphorical substrate. And atheism to you is a very specific type of like three people in the world that are these Raskolnikov type of, they want to get away with a perfect murder. It seems like you have the reductive view of what an atheist is.
Well, let's start with your claim. How do you define the God that you're rejecting? Like, what is God to you? You studied in the church, you found that unsatisfactory. How would you characterize what you rejected?
I think the average Christian believer, when they say that they're Christian and they believe, they mean some sort of God that is all powerful, all perfect, is somehow involved in the matters of this world, and that we look to them through wisdom and with the Logos incarnate in Christ. And it also seems like you don't believe in religion in the way that the average Christian says that they believe in religion. And there are as many gods out there as there are believers, because everybody has mutually exclusive and different.
There's not as many gods as there are believers. There's many understandings of what God is. So that's where he's coming from this. It's the multi-understanding of different situations, and obviously every person is going to subjectively see an objective truth, whatever they want to call it. Most people don't even realize that they believe in God. They just call it something different, whether that be the universe, the energy, whatever else. It just depends on how they want to frame it more than anything. Gracie, hello, hello. How are you doing? Um, but he comes from a standpoint again. He keeps on going to subjective truths. If everything's subject to the person, then nothing is objectively true when you're talking about theism, in the sense that he's trying to. This guy studied so much, but doesn't seem to understand that there is an objective and a subjective truth. What's up, LJ? How you doing?
Different views of what God is. So it seems
Well,
like
if everybody had mutually exclusive views of what God is, no one could speak to each other. The
Yeah.
mere fact of
I'm
communication
doing good, thank you.
presumes a commonality of assumption and
Carlos.
definition. And it's certainly not the case that I regard any archetypal manifestation whatsoever as equally religious. So that's not a real claim. Let me give you an example. For
Precisely.
example, there's a sub-narrative in the story of Moses where Moses is rewarded with a glimpse of God. Okay, and that's one of the ways.
And I have not watched this before, so I'm trying to react to this like as true as I can. And we're also going to pause it randomly like this, just so we don't get any copyright issues or whatever else with this as well. So every like 5-10 seconds,
Ways that
whatever
God
else,
is
I'm keeping
characterized in the Old
interrupting him
Testament
regardless,
stories.
Yes.
but,
Now, Moses is a faithful servant of God and a good man. At least that's the case within the confines of the story.
one possible
oh, that's funny too, because he's picking one of the worst characters in the Bible to say like is actually a good man and is faithful to God, because Moses so many times actually disregarded what God said and was not listening to him and would wait. He's probably the best character in like knowledge wise and whatever else to have done what he had done. But in the sense of being like actually listening to God, he was so disobedient. Like he was one of the worst ones. Like if you're talking about it, like of course, way better than me, of course. But when it comes to like biblical characters, he picked like one of the worst ones, which is hilarious to me.
It's
interpretation.
the case within the confines of the story, obviously. But
Well,
there's
not
a,
obviously.
there's,
When we look at the Bible can't precisely say.
And again, he mocks him, which is, well, they're trying to have a debate here. Like if you're trying to win a debate, you want objective truths. You don't want to come from a subjective point. Like I'm trying to be fair here, but this guy's coming from like very, very opinion based, very emotional states instead of backing anything he has up with real truths, which innately is not correct, especially for an actual debate.
Say anything because there are
And
so many.
that's why Jordan Peterson here, a very intellectual person, very smart, is getting so annoyed, is because he's not having a fair debate here.
different exegetical and
fucking
hermeneutic
subjective.
views of this particular
Very
book,
subjectively.
and that everybody has agreed or everybody has disagreed historically on, it seems like, even the most benign detail about a book this big. And it seems like you can only say that the Bible says something if you first presuppose that it's univocal.
So your claim essentially is that Moses in the Old Testament plays the role of a villain or is irrelevant? Because the alternative claim
I'm
is
saying that we
he's
can't
good.
know, because we
that's-
can't talk to those
look,
authors.
If you are going to start with the presupposition that there's nothing I can say about any of these stories that you're not going to disagree with from the perspective that there are multiple potential competing claims, then I can't speak with you. So
And
you
we
have
also have a short time here, so I want to get to the core of what you're arguing here, and I'd love if we could
the
kind
core
get
of what
through
I'm
them.
arguing is that atheists reject God, but they don't understand what they're rejecting. So I'm trying to
Yes.
give you an example of what's being rejected and its complexity. Okay, so God rewards Moses with a glimpse of the divine. So this is a definition of the God that atheists are hypothetically rejecting.
A possible one.
I said
Yeah.
I didn't say the. I
know.
said a.
That is
Right.
possible, yes.
What if recording high-quality content,
course there's
editing
that.
like a pro, and streaming like a star was as simple?
Okay. So despite the fact that Moses is a stellar character and he's had a long and difficult life and can withstand a lot of difficulty and travail, God puts him between two cliffs. So he can just see a crack of what's in front of him. And when God walks by, he allows him to see his back. Okay, so the implication of that story is that the divine is fundamentally unknowable. It's a pinnacle experience, and that people in their finitude have to be shielded from a comprehensive vision of the basis of reality. Well, that's not the God that's defined in that manner, right? It's not a simple personification.
What he's basically trying to come down with is that God is not a simple thing that can be broken down to an understandable level by most people. Even if you could break down God into pieces, you're not going to be able to understand all of him because it's beyond anything. Even as a whole with humanity, you're not going to be able to understand like what is going on here as a whole. So he's just kind of coming from another understanding. Of,
It's
like,
not a
what
simple
God
old man in
truly
the
is.
sky. It's something that, in its essence, is unknowable and overwhelming. And that isn't, in my experience, the God that's defined by atheists who are attempting to undermine the story. I mean, it's the same claim, for example, that you're a finite creature and that you face something that, in the final analysis, is unknowable, and that you have to establish a relationship with it regardless of your inability to perceive or even withstand perceiving the whole. Okay, is there a problem with that?
I mean, the problem is that when we look at, famously, when you've been asked, do you believe in God? The question becomes, what do we mean by God? And in the Bible, it's not even clear the biblical authors know what God is, because Yahweh has historically emerged from an early storm god, a deity that doesn't exhaust the category of deity, and that has changed over the Old Testament. Does God have physicality? Does God not have physicality? It seems like, yes, if you define religion to mean anybody that has an aim, anybody that looks at the unknown, anybody who wants to go from chaos to order is inherently religious, then yes. But also in the same way, I could define atheist as somebody who doesn't dogmatically believe in a religion, or somebody who doesn't regularly attend religious services or belong to a denomination. To help especially the audience kind of like boil this down, there was a lot of words there. That the central claim is that we exist somewhere between the finite and the infinite.
A central claim.
A central claim is that we exist somewhere between the finite and the infinite.
What's up, Sterling? How you doing?
No,
Is that-
I said that we were finite and we had to establish a relationship with
First
the
time I see
infinite.
this, so we're just kind of
Yeah,
going
then in that
over
case,
and-
then we're all religious, but then I can do the same thing and define one particular element of atheism. It seems like we both have a reductive view of what the other side looks like, to the point where a conversation seems incoherent, and not just incoherent, but not in the way that the average Christian understands Christianity to be.
Do you have a
Okay,
problem
let's
with
pause there. Sorry, you've been voted out by
Awesome.
the majority.
Hey, how's it going? Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, too.
David.
David, good to see you.
Tell me everything that you know about the Polynesian deity Lono, L-O-N-O.
I don't know anything about the Polynesian deity Lono.
So you're rejecting something without knowledge of what you're rejecting.
He didn't say that he was rejecting anything about this Polynesian deity Lono. He says he knows nothing about him. There's a difference between rejecting something and a lack of understanding. You can have a lack of understanding of God and still not reject God. You just, for the most part, are rejecting a relationship with said deity or said whatever. It doesn't mean that you're rejecting it. It literally has no reference nor bearing. And this guy knows by his facial expressions here. It explains that he knows what he's trying to do here.
I'm not rejecting it. No more than I'm rejecting
do you believe in
anything that
Lono?
I don't know anything about.
Do you believe in Lono?
It's a stupid hypothetical that, again, is based off of emotion and no bearing in what this debate really is. In the sense, it's ridiculous, in my opinion.
Do you believe that he is a
relevance of
deity that exists in the world?
I believe it's possible that there's a deity named this. As not a deity that I would look up to, because obviously not a all-powerful deity. Also did not mean to restart that. We're going to go right back to where we were. It's just, it's so funny to me.
My even greater point.
Mm-hmm. For the reasons I just described.
Hey, how's it going? Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you,
David.
David.
So you're rejecting something without knowledge of what you're rejecting.
All good now.
I'm not rejecting it.
Do
No
you
more
be-
than I'm
do
rejecting
you believe in
anything that
Lono?
I don't know anything about.
Do you believe in Lono?
I
Do you
fail to
believe
see
that
the
he is a
relevance of
deity that exists in the world, exists in the universe, that exists in the existence of everything? Do you believe that Lono
I'll
is
answer
a
that
being?
question once you answer my question, which is, do I reject everything that I'm ignorant of? Because that's your presupposition that undergirds your argument, and unless you can prove that that's valid, then there's no point.
My question is quite simple.
Yeah, but that doesn't
Do
mean
you
it's
believe-
formulated accurately.
Do you believe that Lono exists? Yes or no?
I'm not going to answer that question for the reasons I just described. You already insisted that if I reject something, that if I'm ignorant of something, I reject it. Do you think that everyone in the world...
If you're ignorant of something, it doesn't mean that you reject it. It's like saying just because you don't know trigonometry doesn't mean that's not a fundamental law of mathematics. Like, it's just because you're ignorant and don't know about a thing doesn't mean that it isn't real or is real even. It's just that you don't know anything about it. It's not bad nor good. It's just the disillusion of the fact that it doesn't exist in your mind, which is fine.
The world has to know everything simultaneously for that to be valid and true?
I think in order for your
Answer that
argument
question.
to be true, in order for it to be true that we atheists don't understand what we're rejecting, then you need to also apply that to yourself and to Christians and to Muslims and to any other person on this earth where...
If you're ignorant to God, yes. But if you know, you innately know. If you're calling yourself an atheist, you innately know that there is a possibility of there being a God, and you're rejecting that. So anyone that is on this podcast, anyone of these 25, innately knows that there is a possibility, or that there is a predisposition, like there is an actual understanding that there is religion, there is whatever else, and they're rejecting it. What he's arguing is that if you didn't know that there was religions, are you rejecting it? Is what he's trying to suppose upon him. It's like, no, if you don't know and don't care, then for you it doesn't exist. It doesn't make a difference. But if you know and reject,
if
that's
you
where
don't
get the
understand
understanding
what
of
you're
the
rejecting, the
levels.
belief in, then you can't reject the belief in it. That's the implication of your
I didn't
claim.
say that I rejected the belief in Lona. I
It's-
said
it's
I didn't
Lono.
know who Lono was. I didn't
Right.
say anything about rejecting.
That's because I've asked you several times and you haven't. But
What's
let
up,
me get
Space
to
Cat? How you
my
doing?
even greater point. You're saying atheists don't understand what religion is or what God is in order to be able to reject it fully or completely. We have someone over here who studied it in their own way. I've studied religion. I have a degree in religious studies, specialty in Christianity and Mediterranean traditions. And further than that, beyond me, Pew Research studies suggest that atheists and agnostics actually know more about religion and about religious stories, the foundational principles, than believers.
That's because they're more religious than they think they are.
Okay. You can
They're concerned with deep matters, and one of the defining characteristics of someone who
I'd say one of the main things and one of the main reasons why people will oftentimes disregard or want to have a disbelief in a god, when they know innately that there's a high likelihood, is because they either see him as a all unjust god, so someone that's not being just, that's killing and doing whatever else, which is not good. So they believe in something that is not good, or they themselves have problems with the fact that they believe themselves to be judged if what they do or what they want to do in life is not what they believe that they should be doing, and not in a good sense. So either they believe that God is not just, or that they will be judged beyond any means, and both of those things are untrue. For one, is like you're not judged for anything. Like anything that's not of God doesn't go back to God. So anything that's bad, evil, whatever else, those aren't of God. Like it doesn't matter. You're just gonna get rid of them. But if that's your whole being, yeah, your whole facade, your whole understanding of life is these innately destructive parts. That's what's going to be destroyed. That's what's going to get out of here in the end. And if that's your whole being, then yeah, you're not going to go back to God. And
who's oriented in religious direction is that they're
part of you
concerned
will
with
fall
deep
away and get
matters.
destroyed.
Okay.
In
Get
fact,
burned
it's
like
virtually
chaff.
definitional.
Doesn't
Right, but they
mean
also have to identify
that's
with a
an
religious
eternal
tradition
punishment or
and
anything
accept
like that either.
the foundational stories that go along
Well,
with
that would mean more that they're sectarian than that they're religious. And most people, for example, in the United States, deny that they're religious but accept that they're
Let's
spiritual.
pause there. You've been voted out by the majority.
Got voted out so quick before we even said that. Interesting.
Aha!
This guy's actually happy.
Hi, nice to meet you.
How are you doing?
Good, how
What's
are you?
your name?
I'm Greg. Nice to
Hi,
meet you.
Greg.
Okay, so I feel like you're getting at this.
Feels. Again, I hate to point it out there, but almost everyone that's on this other side comes with emotional or purely objective
Idea
truths,
of polysemy,
or subjective
where we
truths, rather.
have multiple related meanings for a word, right? Like, for example, a famous painting can be emotionally moving in that it changes my emotional state. And when I was on the highway coming here to the studio, I was physically moving. I was changing my position. If I said, I believe the Mona Lisa is very moving, and you said, you don't really understand what you're saying, it's nailed to the wall, I would say that you're the one who doesn't understand what I'm saying, not the other way around. And the way that
Hello,
relates to
King. How you
this
doing?
is there are many concepts of God, and I'll admit, I find a lot of what you say about that interesting. I'm familiar with it. The idea of this kind of Jungian hierarchical thing, or as a metaphor or a symbol, or the kind of, atheist, materialist, literalist idea of a agentic, omnipotent, omniscient being that intervenes in reality, right? So when I'm saying that I reject the concept of God, I'm aware of these other definitions of God, but I think that when we use words, we tend to only imply one meaning at a time. So the same way that I would say the Mona Lisa is moving emotionally, but I would not say it's moving physically. I would say I reject the concept of God in this very literal way. But
What literal way?
the way that God is this omniscient, omnipotent, agentic, supernatural being that sent his son down and has, caused miracles and all these things like that. The idea of God is
Do you
like,
think that there's an underlying unity of things?
could you explain that question?
Well, scientists, for example, believe that science unifies in a comprehensive theory. Do you, yes, no, or that
know
there are
that people-
multiple competing truths? Those are the options. Either things unify or there are multiple competing truths.
I think that, I know that, for example, like in physics, people are looking for like a theory of everything.
And why do you think they're doing that?
It's interesting, it's helpful.
But they also believe that there's an underlying unity to things.
So underlying unity of things, what he means is like that everything has a singular basis and everything comes together regardless. And for the most part, science cannot explain this. Mostly because like with having a system, there also has to be a creator. Like there has to be innately. If there was nothing smart or intelligent to be able to create this realm, then there would be no realm. There would be no understanding. There would be no intelligence. There would be no life. even if you had energy, you would just have rocks and whatever else. There would be nothing intelligent nor pure. Like there just couldn't be. There wouldn't be anything because there would innately be nothing to create it. So most atheists' argument is that everything just always was here and always will be. Well, if that's the case, then you're basically explaining the same thing as explaining God. Always was here and always will be. It's pure energy and it's intelligent. We've seen it. We've been able to calculate things being one way or another. We see that systems work purely in an exact way. It's all duality, at least here on Earth. It's yes, no, hot, cold, good, bad. Like it's all works the same. It's interesting.
In a sense, yeah. Like, you mean like the material world and time and space are probably governed by universal laws and principles?
Partly that, yes, yes, but that the same thing might extend to a broader domain that would include imagination and value.
Could you help me connect that to the prompt?
Well, I'm trying to define God, the God
Yeah.
that I don't think atheists do a very good job of defining. Here's another question for you. What do you think guides you in your determination of whether or not what you're saying to me is true?
Can we?
Yeah, how do you come up to an objective truth versus just purely subjective? Because if most people argue that something is true, then is that objective? Versus if you subjectively think something to be true, but it's not. Like, I could say 1 plus 1 equals 4, and I subjectively believe this to always be true. In my heart of hearts, I know that's false. So there is some energy or some being or some part of me that will not allow me to know that as true. But if you have an observable thing that you look at and you lie on purpose, like you're aware of that lie. So there's a objective truth no matter what. It's me being able to perceive something and everyone else being able to perceive a thing and being able to tell each other what that thing is. Even if you have different observations, different angles of an object or whatever else, like every person can have their different subjective truth, but if we're all looking at the same thing, even if it's from different sides, we'll all objectively come up to the same conclusion, and that being, well, this item is a thing, or this universe has a creator, or whatever that truth may be. If you have enough observers, you will be able to come up with one innate, observable truth instead of just having a subjective truth.
Go back. Can we stay on what we were talking about?
We are.
Okay.
You're just uncomfortable with the question.
No, I feel like you're just kind of throwing different spaghetti at the wall.
I'm not.
Okay.
I asked
All right.
you a very...
He's saying that because he doesn't quite understand the question. He's playing a joke, and he knows that he's around subjects. Like, he's got his peers around him. That's fine. But again, talking mostly subjective, every side of this has been so far. And like I said, I'm trying to back people up where I can, because he does have some good arguments. Like, he's trying to propose the fact that there is subjective or subjective
very specific
truths.
question. What is it that you think guides you when you're talking to me to help you determine whether what you say is true?
Logic, memory, reasoning, sensory information.
How do you distinguish that from being governed by something that's false?
An interesting question.
How do you know the difference when you speak between what's true and what's false? So you could imagine...
I infer, right? I can infer. I can.
From what principles?
So, and what are you getting at?
I'm getting at the fact that your conscience guides you. Is that reasonable?
Conscious is defined by
Conscience.
my empathy and my reason are my foundational.
Define it any way you want.
Okay, so that's how I'm defining my conscience. Is my my conscience is my sense of
Right
and wrong. Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah,
Where
yeah.
does that come from?
I would say that comes from an evolved capacity to empathize and a recognition of the benefit.
To empathize. It is an interesting argument because even a psychopath or a sociopath that has no empathy innately knows a true right from wrong. Like, they could be like, oh yeah, I want to kill someone or whatever else, but they know that's wrong. They just don't care. They have no connection, no empathy. So innately knowing a truth, like you don't have to have empathy for
benefits
knowing
of engaging
right from
with and
wrong or
nurturing
truth.
that capacity. And then that empathy is constrained and guided by reason, right? Like, for example, I am driving
I
down
get
the
that, what you're
highway.
saying.
There's a kitten in the road. I'm going to
Reasonably
empathetically feel,
should
oh
be
my
doing
God, I
what
want to
you
save the
understand.
kitten. But then reasonably, like, I'm going to get hit by a car, right? So that's sort of the process through which I make ethical decisions.
Okay,
Is
how do
empathy
you-
constrained by reason?
Do you think that people can differ in their response to something empathically?
Yeah. Like,
Is there a mediating principle that can tell you one person who's empathic and another person who's empathic that disagree, who's correct?
interesting. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah, if you have two subjective truths and both people are supposed to be empathetic towards whatever the situation is, so who has the objective truth in that sense? And well, that's where you have like the trolley problem and a bunch of other situations where you can test what people will do, this, that, or the other. So how do you?
I
come
think
up
that's
with
where we'd have to, talk it out, right? We do that in real life all the time when we have, whether that's a discussion with a friend about the right thing to do in a situation, whether that's a policy discussion about law, right? That's where we can converse with each other, think about things, explain our perspectives, and then kind of reach a conclusion, right? That I think that we do that all the time.
So Elijah, the prophet Elijah, defined God in the Old Testament as the voice of conscience within.
Okay.
That's a definition.
So you're saying by that definition of God, I guess, see, this kind of goes back to where I'm saying initially.
I'm not defining it. Elijah
Okay,
defined
so
it.
as Elijah defines
It's
God.
defined that way in Jonah, too.
Okay, so as
Cardinal Newman also
got
defined
it,
it that way.
And it goes beyond this. Is the true sense of what he's getting at is actually way deeper than most people understand. Is that that conscious or that feeling or innate knowingness doesn't come from yourself. It is beyond your thought. It is beyond your emotions. It is the space beyond that. And that's your space where you're able to choose. It's like you can look at your thoughts, look at your emotions, and then choose which ones you want to accept as being part of you. And your conscience, or this guiding factor, whatever you want to call it, is what allows for that. And when you even get beyond what you choose, you can actually get to a point of something else outside of your understanding telling you innate truths. That's what the true version of God is the innate truths that is beyond self. Like, you can actually get to a point, like, you can go above your thoughts and above your emotions. Like, I know that I'm thinking, I have these thoughts, whatever else, and I can just talk and whatever. And I have emotions. Like, I can be happy about this, sad about this, whatever else. But once you go beyond that, and you're just allowing whatever else, whatever recognition, and then you kind of talk to yourself back and forth, you actually get to a point where there's information that is beyond anything that you understand. And what that comes from is a Godhead.
I'm sure you know many people who've defined it that way.
Hello, how you
and it's
doing?
impressive. You're a very knowledgeable person.
I'm not trying to be impressive. I'm
okay.
just pointing out to you
Got
how
it.
God is defined in the Old Testament.
All right. So
get-
to respond to that,
Just trying to react to this. This is the
I
first
do
time I've seen
think
this,
there are
so I'm
lots of
trying to figure out
interesting
what's what on
ways
this
to
more than
define
anything.
God. And that goes back to my kind of opening
Then how do we
statement.
specify
There's some
what we're
interesting
arguing?
Arguments, but again, almost everyone that's on the atheist side has been subjective. So they're talking about subjective truths versus objective truths. Objective truths comes from the place where we agree on things that are testable and replicable. And what I'm talking about more is like things like math. Like, you can 1 + 1 is 2. We've agreed with that because it actually works and it can be tested and it can go over and over again. Any argument that's against God has been purely subjective. Like, I don't feel this way because of this. Like, yeah, that's fine if you don't want to and you don't want to believe in this. But if it's purely because you think you're going to be judged, or you think that God is an unjust God, then you're coming from a purely subjective point of view. Because you think you know more than God, and what had actually gone in the situations where people did need to be punished and did need to have other situations happen.
About?
We use
interesting
context clues, or we again, it goes back to my example of the
I'm
Mona
defining
Lisa.
God as conscience.
Okay, so that's interesting, but then you're kind of expanding the meaning of
No,
God.
I'm not. That's how it's defined in the Old Testament.
Okay,
in
so-
Elijah and in Jonah.
Sure. So whoever, so
It's
some.
not whoever.
Okay.
Elijah is one of the
Okay.
major
All right.
Old Testament
All right.
prophets.
All
Right?
right.
He's equal in stature to Moses.
Okay.
Right. So it's not arbitrary.
All right. So that is interesting, but it's not relevant to the context with which I am using the term God.
It's directly relevant. Atheists reject God, but they don't
Right, but
understand
you-
what they're rejecting.
you're
You
being-
accept conscience as a guide, and conscience is one of the defining characteristics of God in the Old
I
Testament.
think you're being intellectually disingenuous.
In what way?
Because, again,
I asked you if you believe that conscience guided you.
You just asked me a question and then you stopped me from answering it. In this setting, you understand the way I am using the term God and belief.
Not
and
in
then
the least. I don't understand how you're using it in the least.
So he's trying to come from a standpoint of like, you are rejecting my terminology of what I think God is, and the whole argument that Jordan Peterson had proposed for a debate is that atheists reject what God is but don't fully know him. And he's putting his own definition on God, and Jordan Peterson is saying, hey, this is the true definition of what God is, and this is a part of him. And since you are unaware, ignorant, and blatantly do not want to understand, then you are doing exactly what I have been saying. You have been rejecting something that you don't fully
That's why I'm
understand.
trying to define it. My definition of God as conscience is a lot more precise and oriented than your definition of the God that you
But
hypothetically disbelieve in.
it's irrelevant to the fault lines of this debate.
How is it irrelevant?
Because in common parlance, when we're talking about atheists, God, belief, not belief,
I
we're
don't
not
care
talking...
about common parlance. I'm trying to get to something fundamental.
I think your point is irrelevant to the way that people tend
Which
to use
point?
these words. Your point that there are these polysemous
I didn't make
ideas
that
of God.
point. You did.
I did. Well, I
made a
I
specific
characterized
point
it,
that
right.
God was associated with conscience.
I just feel like you kind of retreat into this semantic fog.
I'm not retreating at all. I'm advancing, sir. You are retreating.
All right. Well, it was very nice to meet you.
nice.
Again, they're laughing because they refuse to understand a deeper connection with what God truly is. Again, and well, going out of focus there. And like, yeah, that's totally fine if you don't really want to know a full version of what God is and the ways that you can use that. As
Appreciate the
an
conversation.
Yeah, it's
and
very
how it
brave
can
of you to
actually
do
be
this.
A great thing. It's just funny again to me that almost everyone is just laughing. Like, again, they think that they're here to win something when everything that they've said in total so far, we're about 18 minutes in, has been subjective. A debate is objective by purpose. To know something is true, there needs to be an objective truth. There needs to be a reasoning for things. Otherwise, there is no point in having a debate. Jax, hello. How you doing?
My next claim is that morality and
And he
purpose.
didn't get anywhere. They didn't have him actually debate and actually being able to put up his actual answers, because everything that they had as an argument against it had been subjective. And one goes to say is like, how can you be objective when it comes to God? Through truth, through research, through connecting with multiple different people, creating claims, testing things, this, that, and the other. Like, if you were to actually go through and test what a life with God is and like what actually God is, and were to give the proper information to people into what, like, showing them what God is, connecting with God, I would say 9 out of 10 people that you gave the proper information to that were open to the information would agree that there is a God. And I only think the one wouldn't is because they have personal problems that they don't want to go through. That's the only reason. Like, I think they'll innately know that there is, but they'll disregard it or reject it because of some personal truth that they have. And I say personal truth because that is a subjective truth. It's not a true truth.
Cannot be
There's
found
only
within
one thing that's
science.
objective. Morality cannot be found within science. Morality cannot be found within science. Right from wrong, it's all subjective. Unless there is an objective truth again. So if you believe there to be an objective truth, you believe there to be a singularity or a God. Again, he comes to the point where that God is the way, the truth, and the life. Which is hilarious, because if you believe in a full truth, then it has to be objective and not subjective. I'm curious where...
What is up, Mr. Canada?
How you doing, man?
I'm doing great.
What's
How are
your
you?
name?
Brian. I think it's interesting that you say that morality and purpose can't be found in science. Actually,
No, within science.
sure,
Yeah.
sure. Purpose, I actually grant you, because purpose is subjective, right? Unless you want to boil it down to the purpose of life is just to procreate, right? Sure, whatever. Morality is actually something that we do see. We actually have examples of Neanderthals and older individuals found in a tribe, missing an arm, missing teeth, still alive somehow in his 40s, 50s, right? Typically, you're a Neanderthal, you can't eat, you can't hunt, you die, right? But we know that members of his tribe were taking care of him, right? So we know that at some level, early in our evolutionary history, we actually developed altruism. We have examples of chimpanzees who actually have a basic understanding of fairness, right? If you give a chimpanzee 2 grapes, right, and his buddy gets 3, right? He actually freaks out, right? But you give both chimps 3 grapes and they're good. We have examples of parrots.
Except for the greedy chimps.
Except for the greedy chimps.
They want 4 grapes.
They want 4 grapes. You know, those do exist, right? But we have similar examples where we do animal tests, right? And
So morality is intrinsic.
I think...
So it precedes...
He's trying to argue morality within science when the system is made to be moral because it is made by a divine God. So yes, there's morality found within science because the system is moral. He's arguing
science.
I think that actually
right?
a better way to define it would be that social animals, which we are, right,
Yeah.
require some level of morality or...
Into what? I'm not disagreeing.
Sure.
Why do they require that?
Because it's the only way that social groups can actually survive, right?
That's my point with
Sure.
regards to science. Thank you very much.
Is that...
Precisely the point that you just made, that science has to exist within a moral framework that isn't in itself scientific.
How's that not scientific?
Well, because it's not derived from the scientific process, as you just indicated.
It doesn't need to derive from the scientific process. It's the fact that...
Hang on a
talking about social sciences, which isn't true science. You can't innately know an objective truth when it comes to social sciences. That's like economics is a social science, same thing as sociology and a bunch of other issues like this that he's explaining, is there is no objective truth. And that's what Jordan Peterson is arguing here, is that science cannot explain anything when it comes to morality because morality is an objective truth. And the only thing that can explain through science is anything that's subjective. It's a maybe.
We are social animals, and we need that to exist as a group.
I
right?
agree, but
Sure.
you pointed to the morality of Neanderthals, to the morality of chimpanzees. They didn't derive that from science.
They don't need to. That's not how
That's
that works.
my point.
Science explains it. So you
No,
just,
science doesn't explain morality.
it doesn't explain how social animals would need to be...
Well, that's
altruistic.
a complicated question.
Is it? But we see it, though.
Yeah, but explaining the evolution of morality and explaining morality itself aren't the same thing.
Okay, so you're asking why does this happen?
Yes, that's more accurate.
Because we're social animals, and we need to be...
Yeah, but there's more to it than that.
Is there?
Sure. For example, so we're moral animals that have a sense of the future.
Sure.
Okay, that makes us unique, and that structures our morality.
No, actually, there are other animals that can predict the future. Or not predict
really.
the future. No, tigers. Actually, there was a tiger at the SF Zoo that killed somebody. And so
Hunting
actually...
animals. Look,
No. Kids threw shit at the tiger. The tiger actually plotted its escape, and it found the
I'm not
kids.
saying that animals can't think.
Okay.
No, but
let's
they can
pause here.
perceive the future.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
Well-
Voted out by the majority.
Thank you, man.
Good man. Yeah.
They didn't really let him finish his argument there, so I don't really know.
How you doing?
How you doing, man?
My name's Luke. Nice to meet
Good
you.
to see you, Luke.
So your claim that morality and purpose can only be found in science is a little shaky because I think that your claim is really being framed to be morality and purpose can only be found in religion. Is that how you're kind of framing it?
I would say that the domain of religion is the domain of morality and purpose. Yes, exactly. And also that science is actually structured, at least in part technically, to eliminate such considerations from its purview a priori.
Okay.
Right? That's why we define science as value-free. But that has to be wrong because scientists have to prioritize their attention towards something before they can even engage in observation.
Okay.
And that act of prioritization of attention is a value predicated act. And so I can continue. There's all sorts of things we have to assume about science before it can take place.
Okay, so what I'm specifically pointing out here is about religion in particular, since you yourself are a Christian, right?
People debate about that, and I generally don't discuss it publicly.
Okay, I understand that. And me, myself, I am a former young earth creationist fundamentalist.
Oh, yeah.
So I have experience in this. I used to run a TikTok channel directed about apologetics about the Bible, specifically in this type of facet with morality, evolution and such, and going back and forth with that. So in the Bible, it talks a lot about slavery, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Interesting how his voice chokes up right as he's saying that too. Because most of the time when you're talking about slavery in the Bible, it's a touchy topic because they're indentured slaves. Though the predisposition comes from the fact that they owed too much to someone else, to the fact that they owed them labor because there was nothing else that they could give them. And actually it's kind of a tough subject because it actually goes into a point where even they owe so much that even their kids own the labor and so on and so forth. And then that comes to a more touchy subject.
Yes, so in that, it teaches you how to take care of a slave. Rather than saying slavery's wrong, I think
No,
it
it
should
says
say
that in the story of Moses.
It says slavery is incorrect. It says
Well,
it's immoral.
that's why Moses leads his people away from slavery.
But why does the Bible?
Moses led them away from slavery because the situation was no longer the fact that, like, hey, I owe you my labor. It was my kid who had nothing to do with this and knows you nothing was owing you labor, and that's where it comes to the unmoral.
Will predicate and tell people exactly how to take care of a slave. Isn't that
Well,
immoral? Wouldn't you say that culturally we've evolved as a species, as he said earlier about empathy?
Yeah, I would say that the reason we evolved, so to speak, away from slavery was because the West was founded on Judeo-Christian morality and the presumption that every person was made in the image of God.
Wouldn't you
And
say
so slavery itself became immoral, and that was established by Protestant Christians in the UK, who then convinced the UK government for 200 years to go to war on slavery.
And wouldn't you say that this is about the cultural evolution of humans in general, rather than just Christianity?
No, I think it's the flowering of the ideas that were embedded in the biblical texts across long spans.
He's trying to argue that it was going to happen regardless. And if you look at everything when it comes to how slavery was being used and exploited, almost every other area within the world at that point had used slaves and had sold slaves, especially after war. And they didn't care because they were not innately their people. Typically, it was very racist because they would be not looking the same. They would be from a different area. They would take them from their area after they won the war, whatever else, and use their labor because they can. Like, it's like, oh, I look at, like, this person looks at this person as lesser because they won the war. They're stronger, innately either stronger or smarter to be able to win the war, and then they use them as slaves, and they saw nothing wrong with that before it came down to
Spans of time.
I feel like this is just humans editing based on the cultural evolution
What do you
of
mean
morality.
by just?
Just?
Yeah, just humans.
Well, humans.
Editing.
Well, based on culture and history, right? We get better.
They did do it based on culture and history, but culture and history have their foundations too. So.
Well, yeah, but we're talking about slavery. So many people bolstered it based on the
Everyone
Bible. Based on the Bible. They
that's
looked at it
much
and they
less true.
justified it in the United States, in the Deep South. They justified slavery
Yeah, but
based
the main
on the Bible.
thrust of Protestant thought in particular was stringently
Yes,
against slavery,
which-
and it was about the only movement in the history
Yes.
of the human race that
Yes.
had an anti-slavery direction.
Which was driven by humans and their
That's
understanding
one
of
way of
morality.
looking at it. Well, it depends.
It's the same with women's suffrage. I mean, women's in the patriarchy.
What do you mean it was driven by humans? Humans drove slavery too.
Yes, exactly.
So there's no argument there. If slavery and anti-slavery were both driven by humans, what does your claim that they were driven by humans have to do with it?
Evolving morality based on the culture that within the society that they live in.
Okay, fine.
So with
I
women's
think that
suffrage
did
as well
happen.
as a very similar topic in the Bible, there are denominations in Christianity such as Pentecostal movement which do bolster women to be pastors, right? Which I think that's a great thing to do. But most like to disregard
Where do you
women.
think the idea that human beings were sufficiently equal to all vote and not be slaves came from?
Humans.
Yeah, but so did the idea of slavery.
So did the idea of God.
Fine, but what's your point? Like, you're not making an argument. You're just saying all thoughts come from humans, regardless of the thoughts.
It's not driven by a higher power. It's driven on our experiences
Define
as
higher.
humans, which is what is best for all people.
Is it driven by conscience?
It could be. Which conscious is also something that has evolved over time. And I think that's something that does evolve in morality and empathy.
It's an interesting point. Is like conscious has evolved over time. I don't think it has. I don't think there's been anything different when it comes to actually, like, human brains. Yes, we apparently have evolved over time, becoming smarter and smarter. In my opinion, I have seen no evidence for this. I think that the overall smartest person on Earth has always been about the same. I have not seen anything to point otherwise, especially when it comes to a lot of these structures that were built way, way, way in the past. They are as intricate as anything that we can build today. And the systems that they used were likely systems that were less advanced at the time because they didn't have the tools to create things that were more advanced. But they used what they had to such an efficient standpoint that innately these people had to be just as intelligent as we are overall, or if not, even more intelligent.
Okay, I don't understand the point that you're making.
My point is that God influenced slavery. People looked at the Bible and went, this is moral because God says so, just like women's suffrage.
There's lots
and
of...
just like homosexuality.
All human societies were slave-owning, so you can't blame that on the Bible.
If humanity decided...
Oh, wait, address that first.
What, about slavery?
All human societies were slavers, so you can't blame that on the Bible.
Well, you can say it bolstered it.
Well, not if you look at the broad sweep of history, because it was the Protestant Christians
based on their
UK.
interpretation of the Bible.
It was the Protestant Christians...
Which evolves over time.
Let's pause there. You've been voted out by the majority.
All right. Well, it was great talking with you,
nice
sir.
talking to you, too.
Dr. Peterson?
Good to see you, man.
Pleasure.
What's your name?
Brian. So the first thing I would like to say is I would like to engage in this discussion in a symbiotic manner. I would not like to engage where there is one clear winner and one clear loser. Emotions are activated and it ultimately comes about ego. So I'm just saying I'm really trying to understand your position, and I would just like you to really try to understand my position.
Deal.
Okay, sounds good. With that, if you're saying that morality and purpose cannot come from science, is the opposite of that true, that morality and purpose can only come from God?
That's a way of defining it, yes.
Okay.
That's right, that's good. So I would say that with regard to the first claim, say, atheists don't understand what they're rejecting, because I would say, by definition, God is the unity upon which moral claims are based. That's a definition, right?
Okay, if there is a God, what is the purpose of life?
Well, and
If there is a God, what is the purpose of life? The whole purpose of life is how. Not how things can be done, but how things will be done. And the goal of it is positive creation, because God is a creator innately. The whole goal is to learn how you can build or do everything. That's why it says, sing to the Lord a new song. It's not sing to the Lord the song you've always been heard. It's innately, God values creation. That's why we see great value within entrepreneurs and in new inventions, is because even within our systems, we know innately that we value pure creation. We value new creation. And I think most people, even people that have been as studied and as old as Jordan Peterson is, don't innately understand the meaning of life. And that is...
in the Christian tradition, the purpose of life is to engage in voluntary, upward, self-sacrifice, so that the kingdom of heaven...
Self-sacrifice. I don't think you necessarily need self-sacrifice. You just need pure creation. And yes, if what you need to do that is self-sacrifice things that you want that are destructive, then yeah, I guess there's some sacrifice to that, but I don't think that's innately
Heaven
the
can be
issue.
established on earth.
So you're trying to make it to heaven and avoid hell.
Yes, that's a
Okay.
good way.
There is no hell. There innately is no hell. Well, most people teach is that there is a hell, an innate destructive force somewhere away from God. What's up? What's up? That is wrong. I'm sorry, but there's no hell. The closest you can get to hell is a space without God before the actual destruction of your soul. And I'm not talking about your soul with God. Your soul is innately part of God, which will return to Him. I'm talking about the parts of you that are not innately good, the parts of you that are destructive and whatever else. Since those are energy as well, and energy has been proposed with those are things that will stay away from God. And what will happen with that? All energy cannot be created nor destroyed, so it will be transformed into something that is pure again, and it will return to God. So even in itself, every part of you, there's no hell. It's all going to be transformed and turned back into the energy that is God. So does everybody go to heaven? Yes, like quite literally everybody goes to heaven, but if your whole being is something that is not innately good or innately of God, then that whole portion of you will fall away. And what that will look like is it's like a hell. It's just completely destroying yourself. It's like when you go to sleep and you see nothingness. That's all it'll be for you. That's what I say is like everybody is sleeping and waits for Jesus to come back, because until judgment time you're sitting in essentially a dreamscape, and if all the things that you can think about are not good or not innately of God, the only thing that you come up with is nightmares. So it's either just black, yes, you have nothing, or the only thing that you can create and the only thing that you can do in that dreamscape is create nightmares for yourself, essentially. So it's one of the two, which that is more like a purgatory escape place people usually would call hell, place away from God. And then everything that is away from God will eventually be transfigured, transformed, and turned back into things that are pure and returned to God. The whole purpose of this is just to learn all the things that are possible and the different ways that we will do things. So that way when we all return to God, we can expand creation in every direction instantaneously. So quite literally, everything that ever can be created will be created instantly. And for an eternity, we will be able to witness and go through and check out and do anything and everything that is within that scape. It is literally the ability to create everything is why this is going on, why we're being tested in such a sense. Is because you want pure creation. You don't want to create nightmares, and you don't want to create destructive areas.
If that's a good way of thinking about
What
it.
is the purpose of heaven?
Literally cause a hell, which is what.
Do you understand? So here's the deal.
At
We
minimum,
get
it's
into
the
an
opposite
infinite.
of endless suffering. How about that?
Okay, and so should we not try to achieve infinite suffering on planet Earth? And if we can
Achieve infinite suffering on planet Earth? What?
achieve infinite suffering on planet Earth
You mean
without
avoid
God,
you mean avoid
avoiding it. If we
yeah.
can do that without God, then does that defeat your claim?
If you can avoid all suffering on Earth without God, you create heaven on Earth, which is essentially the goal. Do you say what the purpose of heaven? Jordan Peterson? No, he's not.
Well, yeah, except that it doesn't. You circumvented my initial definition because I said that by definition, God was the unified source of morality. And so if we engage in a moral exercise.
And when you're talking about morality,
He's trying to ask this guy's trying to ask to Jordan Peterson, if you created a moral area here on Earth where everything was morally just as possible, and you basically create a utopia on Earth, would that remove the existence or need for a heaven? And I don't believe that to be innately true. And the main reason for that is that this whole thing was a test to try to get to that point, And if you ever did get to that point, then the whole purpose of this realm would be fulfilled. It would all be over. So it wouldn't matter. So then you'd return back into the system that is God, the energy, the Godhead, the universe, whatever you want to call it. I think the problem is that most people don't understand what God is, or they just call him a different thing and don't realize that that's what they're doing.
Though, when you really reverse engineer it and you get it down to its root, you're a psychologist, it really seems like it just has to deal with motivation. People are saying there is a God,
It's more specific than that.
Well, so let me ask you this. So if there is a God and there is a moral code and it doesn't come at your benefit, are you going to follow it?
And that's the argument. And that's why we don't have a moral just area, is because that's what Jordan's argument was earlier, is you need to be self-sacrificing at times, because if your personal narrative of what you believe to be just is not the objective truth of being just, and you have to suffer to basically kind of go into that position.
It depends on how you define your benefit. If it's
going to come at your expense, would you still follow it?
Expense.
If God came down and said, here is my moral code and you should follow it, but even if you follow it, you are still going to end up in hell.
There's no hell. That's most people's disposition, is like they believe that there will be punishment when all punishment has been paid for. There is no punishment. There is no innate hell, because every soul is pure and made through God. So that's where the argument is that most people are too scared and too afraid to realize how good God is. Hello, Kobe. How you doing? And they don't realize that the devil is limited to this realm, and the only reason that the devil exists is because there needs to be a evil to be able to make a positive. So there needs to be a negative for a positive. The only reason devil exists here is so that we can test yes, no's, basically. Testing good, bad, good, bad, good, bad, whatever. It's all duality. The whole reason that we have Earth here is duality, and the reason we had to put it onto time, in the sense that we have time, is because without time, then there'd be no meaning. We could just do things for an eternity, do nothing, do everything instantaneously, and it wouldn't matter. So that's why we have time. And to actually test things, you need to have time. So that's why God set this position into play, is because without testing everything with time, if you were to put everything into enactment instantaneously, you would cause such chaos and such disorder that whatever you created would not be worth it. It would be innately destructive, innately ugly, just something wrong with it by meaning, because whatever you prompted it with, whatever you put into the system, was innately wrong. So that's how you have to test a system before you run the program.
Are you going?
And that's what the whole point of this world is you're testing a system to be as perfect as it possibly can, to actually run the program, which is the point of what heaven is running the program of pure creation.
To follow it?
Well, that was the question that was put to Job and to Christ, right? Because they were required.
Job is such an interesting argument. I have to pause it again. Job is an interesting argument because people believed Job to be innately perfect in worshiping and living to a God standard, but Job was not perfect. He was egotistical and believed himself to be at the same understanding as God. And we are shown that by God basically asking him a bunch of questions like, where were you when I took care of Leviathan and this, that, and the other? Or who are you to calm storms? And he shows them basically a bunch of examples of why his understanding is lesser than God. And we are shown that Job, as good of a man as he was proposed to be, is innately wrong as well.
Hang on, I'm answering your question. They were required to withstand trials that would break anyone and maintain their upward orientation regardless.
And they did that with the motivation of believing that this omnipotent, all-loving God would somehow turn it into a benefit.
They didn't know that they would get anything out of it. Job, his whole family was killed. Everything was taken away from him. God never promised anything back. They didn't promise him double. Didn't do this, that, or the other. He was just pleading with him. He just pled with the Lord. Like, had so many issues with him and was like saying like, why would you do this? Just absolutely pleading with the Lord. Why? And then his friends are like, who are you to ask the Lord? And he's like, I'm not denying the Lord anything. I am purely wanting understanding. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with seeking wisdom, seeking truth, which is seeking God itself. And there's nothing wrong with actually pleading with the Lord. And his friends were actually wrong into telling him not to do that, because that's what he should have been doing, is actually asking the Lord what's going on, this, that, and the other, because all understanding and all truth comes from God.
So they still did it solely for
Just trying to make sure I'm
their benefit.
So
yes,
let's
they
define.
did. Yes,
hang
they did.
Hang on. Let's define benefit. Like, if I did something for your sister, would that be to your benefit? Like, how are you defining your benefit? Do you mean one of your whims gratified now? Or do you mean you and everyone you love and know over some reasonable span of time? Like,
so
what do you mean by
when you're talking about whims, I think you're talking about something that's more dopamine. When you're talking about morality, you're talking about something that's more serotonin and more ultimately satisfying. So you and I agree on a lot. I mean, when it comes to talking about how men should be masculine and things of that nature, you and I are 100% in agreement. We just don't agree on the justification that God is the only thing that provides morality.
It's not a justification, it's a definition.
What's the difference then?
God is the objective truth. That's what he's arguing.
Between a definition and a justification, I mean, it's ultimately psychologically the same thing.
Well, we have to define what we're talking about before we can debate.
Okay, well,
because are you having an objective truth, or are you having a subjective truth?
So here's my position.
I said that God, among other things.
I'm actually a non-theist. I'm not an atheist. I believe the human condition is one of uncertainty. And what that means is that I don't believe that you can conclude there is a God with certainty, and I don't believe that
Disconnected. Is my connection really that bad? Hold on one moment. I think we're back.
you can conclude that there is a God without us in the same position. Now, with that, I don't care. I still wake up every day and I have motivation to be a moral person.
Define moral.
Moral, what I ought to do.
Okay, and how do you come to that conclusion?
And what I ought to do, ultimately, it comes down to what not just benefits me, but what benefits the entire planet, what benefits the entire system. I think that your entire moral perspective comes from linear thinking, and when you look at the reality of the universe, it's actually more so holistic. So when you look at how Aristotle defined God, when he said that there had to be an unmoved moved or an uncaused cause, he was defining God from a linear perspective, and you do the same with morality, and you do the same with purpose.
How does my definition of morality? How does my definition of morality hypothetically differ from yours?
Because you're saying that there's something that exists in a vacuum, that it exists in and of itself, and nothing in the universe exists in a vacuum. Nothing exists in and of itself.
So he's trying to find. So you're talking about closed units versus open units. So closed unit is that everything exists within itself, like everything, Earth, everything is existing in its own space. And if you're talking about God existing outside of that space, you're talking about a separate closed unit or a separate open unit. And you're believing that this closed unit cannot exist within that open unit. Is understanding comes from a point.
It's a whole systems-based morality.
Is that the closed unit that is Earth cannot exist within an open infinite unit of God itself. That one cannot exist separate from the other or outside of the other, essentially.
It's a systems-based reality.
Is there a hierarchical
structure? And that is
structure?
what the quantum...
Is there a hierarchical structure? Are some things more important than others?
Are some things, I think some things lead to more benefits than others.
Then, by your own definition, some things are more important than others.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
What is
pause there? You've been voted out by the majority.
Appreciate it, Peterson.
That's like the worst time to get him out of there. He's probably the best one. So
How you doing?
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
I guess since you said morality and purpose cannot be found in science, it would just depend on like what you're referencing. If you're saying a description of your psychological preferences would be considered within science, sure. But I don't think that you have to say that it comes from science in order to be like an atheist. As an agnostic atheist, I don't know if God exists and I don't believe that a God exists. And the only ones that I would really reject would be like the all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good, perfect notion of God that plenty of Christians like prescribe themselves. So I guess
How is that relevant to this claim?
you're basing a position of morality and purpose in some like notion of God that isn't the same type of notion of God that typical Christians would prescribe. Your notion of God is
What typical Christians?
yeah, typically when I talk to Christians, they say that they believe in an
How
all-knowing.
about Cardinal Newman, who defined God as conscience? He was a major influence on all of Catholic social theory. How about that Christian?
Sure. So do you believe in the all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good notion of God?
What do you mean by
all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good. Well, you're expecting yourself to know what all-good is the issue here. All-knowing, yes. God knows everything. Like, he has the system. He has the building blocks. He allows us to do everything that we want and within this realm. All-powerful does not mean that you're going to control everything is the issue, too. When people hear an all-powerful, all-knowing, all-good God, what they're trying to propose is a God that will be controlling when things don't go good. And if you've seen a dad that allows their kid to go skating, jump off a cliff into water, whatever else, just because something can be dangerous and can be bad for someone doesn't mean that he's going to step in necessarily. So if you're looking at an all-good God, you got to realize that, or an all-knowing or whatever, all-powerful God, you got to realize something, that he works more like a dad to us. And the fact is that you're going to be put into positions that you can hurt yourself. You can create destruction. And in some cases, even, obviously, we've seen from history, you can create genocide and war. That doesn't mean that he believes those things to be good. It just means that he will allow the system that is running, whatever you want to call it, Earth, the planet, the time itself. He'll allow time itself to run because that is not the point of what is going on here. The point is to test everything possible. You need these evils, these destructive forces to be able to cause the opposite, to cause room for good, room for creation. So without destruction, you're not going to come up with creation. And without breaking things down, you can't build anything. It's like without cutting down a tree, you can't build a wooden chair. Like, just because something's innately destructive does not mean that it won't cause creation.
I believe?
And that's why
You think it to be true?
step in.
That's the circular
Hello, Victoria. How
definition.
you doing?
What do you mean
How
when
is
you
that
say you
circular?
believe?
How is that circular?
Because you added no content to the answer by substituting the word true and believe.
I said you think it to be true.
All right. So if
What's
you
a
believe
belief?
something, you stake your life on it.
What do you mean by that?
You live for it and you die
An
for it.
innate truth.
That's what I mean by that. It isn't something that you say.
Something that you
It isn't
believe.
something that's associated with logical consistency. It's not declarative. It's not propositional. It's not a figment of your imagination. It's the presupposition of your attention and your action. And you're either fragmented, in which case you worship multiple gods, or there's some unity at the bottom of it that makes you an unstoppable force.
Okay, so you're saying that you don't believe something if you wouldn't die for it?
Not really, no.
Okay. So then,
How would you define belief? Something you say?
Can I explain? Like, I could believe it is the case that this pen exists, but if someone like threatened my life, right, I would lie in order to be able to save my life, right? Like, I think you would do that too. You wouldn't lie to save your
Don't
life?
be so sure.
You wouldn't lie to save your life?
So I was trying to argue, if you know an innate truth, but someone who proposes violence against you, knowing that it might not be true, or maybe they don't, if someone proposes violence against you, would you die for something that you know to be true if it doesn't have value. And he's talking about a pen. No sane person would back up something that they know to be true to someone who is innately false, that is garnering violence against them. It just doesn't make sense. Unless you yourself can back up that violence with something else, which is actually taught in the Bible that you can do, is someone that is innately violent against you. That's actually not called murder. Like in the Bible says like if someone causes that type of violence against you, you can kill them. Like that happens like plenty of times. People die. There's wars in the Bible. The only thing that you shouldn't do is kill unprovoked with no reasoning nor backing it up. It's like if someone gardens your life and tries to kill you, then you have the right to defend yourself in a sense. In the same way with law because of that. Well, most of our law actually comes from biblical principles because it's the same things that we know to be innate truths. It's what
How much do you know about me? I didn't lie to save my career. I didn't lie to save my clinical practice.
Would you lie to like save your children, your mom, your dad?
I don't think lying would save them.
No, can there ever be a circumstance logically that lying could save someone?
Yeah, and if you're steeped in sin, you're likely to live in circumstances like that.
I'll give you an example. If you're like in like Nazi.
Exactly. It's unlikely to come into situations where you have to. I love these debates. I appreciate you, Marie. To come into these situations where you actually have to lie to defend your position, and it's so weird.
Germany, and it is the case that there's like Jewish people in your attic and you're trying to protect them. Would you lie to like the Nazis?
And an argument again against a subjective truth and a hypothetical. This is not a debate. This is I didn't even know what you call it. It's putting up a false defense, essentially.
I would have done everything I bloody well could so I wouldn't be in that situation to begin with. It's a hypothetical and it's not answerable.
Hypotheticals?
No, I can't answer a hypothetical.
Of this guy? Of this guy? Or the other side? I don't know which side's which on you guys' screen, so didn't know another word for it.
Like that because
Did
it's
you eat
far.
today?
Look,
Did you
don't
eat today?
play games.
I'm not playing a game. I'm just asking
Yes,
if you
you
ate
are.
it.
If you present me with an intractable moral choice that's stripped of context and you back me into a corner, you're playing game. I just told you.
Again, games. He's basically trying to argue, would you go against a objective truth to please someone of their subjective truth of saying that a pen isn't red or isn't black or whatever else, or the pen doesn't exist at all, if what that meant was you weren't going to have your family killed or something else? Proposing these hypotheticals is irrelevant to knowing actual truth or saying actual truth. And what Jordan Peterson's coming to is that he says, like, I wouldn't want to be found in these situations and where I have to sin to cause whatever else. And I don't believe that lying itself is sin, especially in this sense. If you know an objective truth and you lie about it, that innately would not be sin unless it causes the destruction of someone else or something else. Which, in this case, it's going to quite literally do the opposite. So no, it wouldn't be even a sin. Like if you lie about that, you're trying to stop destruction. And if this other person still kills them, they're the one that's sinning, and your lie had no effect on the system as well.
I would do everything that I could to make sure that I'm never in that situation. By the time you've got there, you've made so many mistakes that there's nothing you can do that isn't a sin.
Being born in Nazi Germany and trying to protect people that you care about, like if there could be a Jewish friend that.
This is Jordan Peterson against 20 atheists, or it's 25, I believe, but it's Jubilee.
You have, and you want to protect them.
I think you should.
I'm trying to argue both sides, so if someone has a good point on this side, I'm trying to explain it, and if Jordan Peterson has a good proposition, I'm trying to explain it as well, through my objective truth of like what I understand of the Bible. And it's kind of funny because Jordan Peterson comes like halfway to answering questions, but because he knows that these other people, well, he knows he's on a time limit as well, but he also knows the other people are not willing to open up to a full understanding of what God is, he tries to limit a lot of what he says, especially because he's a public figure. He has a limited amount of what he can say, especially with the interviews he does. He has multiple books. He's a doctorate. It's just a little bit harder for him to be able to say.
You have
Just
them
give
in your
up on
attic.
that line of questioning.
Give up on just like trying to clarify your position?
Which is
Because you
I
don't
did
like, are you like
clarify it.
uncomfortable with me asking this question? It's just a basic hypothetical. Like I could ask
It's
you.
just a basic
yeah, yeah.
hypothetical.
A basic hypothetical. No hypotheticals are worthwhile. No hypotheticals are worthwhile because it will not innately happen, or it's not actually happening. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter.
Like
Where
like
you
if you
put Jews' lives at stake in Nazi Germany, that's just a basic hypothetical.
obviously you would lie in that scenario to save their life, but you're like not trying to answer this question for some reason.
I just told you why.
Are you anti-fascist? Like, so you're
Why
anti-fascist?
are you asking that?
I was just asking, just clarifying. But like, okay, again, you're not answering this hypothetical because you know it shows that you clearly would lie to save
I'm
someone's life.
answering it in
Obviously,
a
that's
manner
not what
you
truth
don't
is.
find acceptable.
Obviously, because I care about truth.
I wouldn't be in that scenario.
Obviously, right? Logically, because that's
No.
already happened. Like that's in the past. You don't have a time travel device. We're bringing this logical hypothetical up to show you that in some circumstances that do
interesting, too,
happen
because
within
a lot of people that see this argument is they believe him to be right and that he's like, oh, he cooked Jordan Peterson or whatever else. But everything that this man has said has been a subjective truth, and he's trying to argue a fallacy of the fact that you would innately lie. So if you're lying, then the objective truth is irrelevant. And if that's the case, then the objective truth is not what's real. Well, if something's green, it's green. Just because I tell you it's blue, it does not change the color of it. That's what Jordan Peterson is arguing. Is just because I tell you it is what it isn't, or you try to coerce me into a way that I would be lying to you, does not make it to be untrue. Which what he's arguing is that if you were to say what is false as to be true, then there is no innate truth. And that's just not true.
the real world, you would lie to save people's lives. So your definition of truth is
I am going through Jordan Peterson versus atheist, trying to
actually how we're typically using it. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to muddy the waters when I ask you, like, do you believe this? Do you think this to be true? So you don't actually
different situations and how he probably should have answered. And we're also expanding on a lot of it because he can't answer everything fully. Yo, what's up, Metro Boom? And a lot of what they're saying on this side, on the atheist side, is subjective truths. Almost everything that they're saying is oh, I feel this way, or I've seen this way, or it's personal truths. What did you say? Personal truths. There's one objective truth, and that is God. They have different prompts. This one is morality and purpose can't be found within science. So if you're trying to find an objective truth, then you need to all agree about it, or there needs to be something true about it. So we're talking about what an objective truth is. Something like math. 1 + 1 = 2. And for some reason, this guy's trying to get into a proposition of Nazi Germany and if you would lie. So if you were to lie, then the objective truth would not matter, is his argument. And then the morality of telling the truth wouldn't matter. And that just comes to a really tough and unmeaningful situation into where none of what you say in that situation would matter because the other person is only there to incite violence.
have to answer the questions. And plenty of Christians don't like that because they clearly see that you don't really like want to be associated with
I can
Christianity.
imagine that I was in a situation where the best I could do as a consequence of my previous mistakes was to tell the least amount of lie I could manage. But that would likely indicate that I had made all sorts of catastrophic errors on my way there.
So you would lie to save someone's life. So again, you do believe it to be true in that circumstance, even though you lied in that scenario. So
not
clearly that's
without the context that I put it in.
You were not willing to die for it. You were not willing to let other people die for it. So that's not what you see to be true then.
You have values of truth. He's trying to argue that it's something that you believe to be true, you wouldn't die for it. And yes, you shouldn't die for something that you believe to be true unless it is the only way to explain to others or to a larger group of people or a larger subset an innate truth that you have no choice but to back up. And it's the same situation. You're going to have violence incited on you regardless of whether you die for it or not. Then yeah, you're going to tell the truth. If you believe that this violence will not be set upon you if you lie, then you will lie. It comes to a self-preservation point. Is if you believe yourself or others to not be preserved, then you will tell the truth. But if you believe yourself or others to actually be preserved, if you lie, then you won't. You'll just lie. Like, it won't really matter.
Then, seemingly.
There's values of truth.
You're doing exactly what I said you were doing at the beginning of the conversation. You're generating an impossible, restricted, hypothetical with no precursors to back me into a
How's
corner.
it possible? Is there something contradictory about it? Nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you too.
Great conversation.
Yeah. My next claim is that everybody worships something, including atheists, even though they might not.
I hate the word worship with a passion. I hate the word worship with a passion. Worship means that you're subservient of a individual, a godhead, or a set belief. And the way that worship is used a lot of times is that you have all praise and you are singing and doing this, that, and the other for this godhead or being, whatever else. When quite literally the way to worship God, or worship in a sense, is to live a godly life. To live in a way that others will understand that you are a part of the kingdom of God. Which most people don't do.
Know it.
And some people do that aren't even Christian.
Hi.
So.
Good work.
Thank you.
Hi there.
I'm Zena. So I want to start off with like defining terms.
Yep.
How do you define worship?
Prioritize.
Prioritize. So almost like having a preference over something rather than the other.
It's a hierarchy of preferences.
Yeah.
And you use it to direct your attention.
Right.
So whatever you're attending to, you're.
He explains worship in an interesting way too. Is a hierarchy of understanding.
Worshipping.
Like,
Right.
what do you put
So I've
before
kind
all,
of become a little bit familiar with your idea of like this value-laden
again,
hierarchy.
Yeah.
Right. And you kind of posit that at the bottom of this hierarchy, or you could call it top or bottom, I
Yeah,
suppose.
right.
At the bottom of this hierarchy, this foundational priority in your life is going to be considered God.
That's
Is that
right.
correct?
Yes.
Right. I'm trying to imagine a situation in which could there be that someone has a priority at their foundation that is different from someone else's?
Oh, definitely.
Right. So we can have different conceptions of God.
That's why we fight.
Right. So essentially, there's not one God, but there are multiple gods, and these gods exist in some.
Well, yes and no. There's one true God. There's one true understanding. That's why there's one innate truth. There's an objective truth. There is other things that you can serve. Trust me, I got my phone right here. Like, there's other things that we can value above God, above whatever innate understanding that we have. God, we can make our phones our God. We can make money our God. We can make TikTok, whatever else, liquor, drugs, our God. If that's the thing that we're putting most of our energy and whatever else towards, those are going to be the things that we're worshiping. It doesn't mean that that is innately the one true God.
Realm of truth, it's true that
Make it to be the truth. It makes it your truth. It's again another subjective truth.
this person has one God and it exists.
Yeah, probably better to think about it as multiple values, but that there's a hierarchy of values with something at the bottom.
Right, but at the
Or
bottom is
top.
God, and there
That's
are.
a definition, yeah.
Yeah, so at the bottom is God,
Yeah.
and there can be multiple people with different conceptions of God, and.
I thought you did most of Minecraft. Good to know you're following God. I like to talk about this like just randomly, but yeah, I saw this video and I'm like, I want to react to it regardless. I'm probably going to post the full thing. I'm recording on Twitch as well. I'm gonna be reposting the whole thing on YouTube after, and then I'll probably do a cut version of it eventually. But
They're each valid and being called God. So there are multiple gods that exist.
Like, kind of go into.
It depends on what you mean by valid. So far, so good, but it depends on what you mean by valid, because I would say that some foundational conceptions don't play out when they're implemented.
Oh, and to go into that even more as well, is not just a follower of God, but the true version of God. Like if you look into like how Jesus lived his life, the way, the truth, and the life. If you live like Jesus and look into how Jesus had his life and really seek out truth, then you'll have a full or almost full understanding of what God actually is. And most people uh, do not want to go in depth because they believe themselves to be imperfect, that they will be judged, that they have to go through a bunch of stuff, go through tribulations, whatever else. It doesn't really matter. I don't follow denomination, dude. I don't. I follow Jesus and his teachings. Like that's basically it. And what I basically say as well is like I don't innately know, nor do I care if Jesus was God. I think that Jesus lives a godly life, and that's what we need to be doing. It's irrelevant to me if Jesus himself was actually God. Which many people would be like, well, that has a predisposition of like, well, if Jesus wasn't God, then God relies outside of yourself and outside of whatever else, right? No, God is everything. God is energy. God is a part of your soul. Your soul will innately go back to God because you are a part of God. So I believe that everyone is a part of God. Should be relevant, but yeah, say it should be relevant, but it's not necessary. I believe everyone to be a part of God. I don't believe that like Jesus himself, like it's possible, yes, that he was the first one that was fully apart with God, and it's possible that he was pure. What I think it is that it's irrelevant if he was or wasn't, because it's actually more relevant if he wasn't. Because if Jesus was something that could become like God, if he was someone that was born impure and could become like God, then we can do the same thing that he did and become. I'm not saying powerful in a sense. I don't care about power in this. Like, it's irrelevant. What I mean is being in a position to do everything that is godly, everything pure, everything good, everything that is true in an objective sense, in the sense that God himself set it into place to be.
So if you put the wrong thing at the foundation, you end up in hell, for example. That's what happens.
Again, end up in hell. There is no hell. I'm sorry to put it this way, but an innate perfect God does not create a hell in a sense. Maybe a hell that we understand it. Yes, there's going to be a waiting place that in if you are not pure, you will cause for yourself innate terrors. You will create yourself a living hell because what is outside of this place is a dreamscape. It is a place where you will be sleeping until God comes back. So if the only thing that you can do is create nightmares, the only thing that you will do is create nightmares, and that's what hell is for you. It is a psychological torment for all of existence until Jesus comes back, in which case you will be transformed or transfigured into portions that are of God again and then return to him. All energy can't be created nor destroyed, and God is not going to let any portion of him that was away from him not return to him. So if any portion of you that is not good or not of God or of the system that is good will be transfigured. It will be turned into something that is good against your will, and whatever is left will be destroyed. That's why they say it'll be burned like chaff. It's the same thing as if you're burning away the impurities of iron. That energy is not destroyed, is just transformed into something else. So yeah, there is something that we call hell, but it's very temporary in the grand scheme of things. And in the end, we're all going to be transformed into something that returns to God again anyways. The whole point of this, ever heard beliefs like yours? I seek truth. That's it, Metro. I seek truth. So that's how I come up with my beliefs, is I seek truth. I want to know not what others believe, but things that are actually true, and I want to back it up with why. Why would this be true? Why would this be true? Like, it has to be. Because it has to be. Anything that is good and is pure and is a closed unit, like this world is, it's a closed unit, We know this because of everything that we've understood to be true, that energy cannot be created nor destroyed. And if that's the case, then even things like our souls cannot be created nor destroyed, in a sense that the energy of them. Therefore, any parts of you that is not of God and is not going to return to God just needs to be transfigured. It needs to be transformed into something that is of God to be able to return to God, to be actually made pure. Otherwise, there wouldn't be any relevance to having those portions, and those portions would have to be destroyed. And if you can't destroy God, and if everything is a part of God, it needs to be transfigured. It needs to be. It has to be. Like it's just how it is. Like everything
in totalitarian
is
states.
energy, and everything.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're
So
saying
they're not all equal. Like all foundational principles are not equal, even though
Right.
they might be equally foundational. Right.
So what makes one kind of foundational tenet like better than another one?
That's an excellent.
Personal values. Like what makes one thing more valuable than others? It's whatever you seed to be, essentially. We go off everything. I go off everything on the Bible, but you twist those in a way that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I go off everything on the Bible as well. I think some of it's not meant to be taken literal, although they could have happened literally. I think a lot of it's allegory. I think a lot of the, especially yeah, I think a lot of the, especially the Old Testament is allegory. So like being able to stand above troubled waters is essentially being able to stand above your thoughts and emotions and being able to calm those. So if you're very tormented in a sense that you are scared or this, that, and the other, that you can stand above those. The you that you are is not your thoughts, not your emotions. And if you can look at your emotions and deem them to be irrational, they will go away and be calmed. And that's what that's what it means by Jesus calming the stormy waters, essentially, is being able to stand above his thoughts and emotions and calm them because they're irrelevant to who he is.
Question. Iterability. Imagine that you play a game with someone and you're a kid and it's fun. So then you play again and again and again.
So
Well, then
repetition.
it's playability across multiple iterations. So then you have a friend, and a friend is better than having a game, right? So that's one. Breadth of application is another. So if it's just for me now,
depth and breadth.
it's not as good as something that would be benefit to both of us across time.
Right. So we're explaining like characteristics that can be applied to like these types of like foundational values. But why is it that this iterability makes it better? And what does better mean?
Well, one hallmark of better is likely to be selected voluntarily. So it's invitation.
So you don't believe in some parts from the Bible, like they are not all supposed to be taken literally? I believe that they're both supposed to be taken literally and as allegories and parables. That these things supposedly did happen, as well as the meanings behind why they happened are meant to be taken in a way that we can understand even now as to be not necessarily literal, but things that we can do to transform and change our brain to work in a sense that is more like God and more like as it was actually intended, being able to strip away the portions of us that were impure, things that are innately destructive, and replace them with things that are innately creative, and being able to be more positive in that sense. I think it's irrelevant. It's not that I don't care. I would love to believe that Jesus is God, and I want to look into it more and actually understand if he is or not. But if he is not innately the only one that was innately good and is God, then that actually offers a even more opportunity for us, essentially. It allows more opportunity for us to grow and to be transformed into people who live even closer to be like God, in a sense that we can do miracles that were beyond what Jesus did, which is what he also tells in the Bibles. He says that there will be those that come after me that do things that more than what I have done. And I'm not saying it's not relevant. I'm saying that it is so relevant that if Jesus was not the only one that was innately part of God, then what we can do is things that are even more powerful than what Jesus did. And I think that he was more crucified for the proposition that everyone was a part of God. Was a part of him to sort of, yeah, I'd say everyone had a connection with the Holy Spirit, and that's what being a part of God is, essentially. The Holy Spirit is
another descriptive kind of quality. So we're talking about characteristics that
means that
in some type of system with a goal, an output being like, we could maybe say happiness, right? Or some type of
harmony.
Harmony,
Yeah,
right?
that's better. Not happiness precisely, because it's too short term.
Exactly. So as someone who is an atheist, right, I can explain that within a system, there are things that we can see as better or worse to meet this goal or meet this output. But what we're interested in, though, is what could make these things, regardless of any system, right?
Well, imagine that you set up a system and you implement it, and it produces the opposite results to which you intend. Oh yeah, that's not a good system.
Exactly.
Right, so the foundational principles are lacking because when you implement them, the game degenerates instead of moving towards the aim.
Right,
Okay,
so we're talking about within a system. When we talk about...
Again, you're arguing that the game degenerates instead of going towards the aim. The existence of humans still on Earth as a proposition of testing whether what this system is doing is right or wrong, the existence of us still being here shows that more likely than not, what was proposed was perfect. Because if not, we would have caused our own destruction. And you're also arguing, well, why is there all this destruction and war and whatever else? Is that without these innately destructive devices, you would not have the equal opposite energies of these positive creations. Is that every reaction has to have an equal and opposite reaction. So only through going down into the deepest pits of hell can we come to a understanding of nearly pure bliss of what heaven or nearly heaven on earth would look like. And excuse me, I'm just getting off of a cold, so it just comes to an interesting understanding.
Something being moral, right? Just absolutely moral. It means that without a system, right, this thing is simply moral with no reason. Like, stance independent, this thing is good. So I'm trying to figure out if such thing can exist.
Not necessarily.
And if so, do you believe that these things are moral in of themselves, like self-evidently moral, or are they moral in accordance with the system?
I can't define them any more accurately than I already did, really.
Okay. In regards to morality, when we talk about the divine, when we talk about God and religion, these moral tenets and religion, right, and God exists as good because it is God, right? So it's self-evident, right? Without any kind of goal or output, this thing is good. So I want to figure out how...
There's an element of that that's true. So, for example, in the story of Job, Job is unfairly tortured in consequence of a bet between God and Satan. And so Job is...
Is Job unfairly tortured? It depends on what you deem to be fair. Job believed himself to be at the same understanding of God. So if you believe that his ego and his understanding was not a sin, then yeah, you'd say that it was unfair. But if you try to put yourself at the same position as God and trying to put yourself as the same understanding as God, then yeah, I guess it wasn't fair.
Emblematic of someone who's being hurt for no apparent reason. Okay, so Job's response to that is that he refuses to lose faith in himself, and he refuses to lose faith in the ultimate goodness of being. Okay, and those are axiomatic decisions. They're not exactly evidence dependent because he is suffering. There's an arbitrariness in that that's reminiscent of what you claim.
So I'm essentially trying to figure out, do you believe that something can be good, like stance independently, something that can be good?
I don't know what you mean by stance independent.
Okay, so
you mean independent of people?
Something that can be good that stands independent. So you mean that there has to be an innate evil if there is good. There can't be just something that is good that stands independent. Without a pre-understanding of the equal and opposite, there is no innate good, I think.
Independent of people, we can use that, or more so, I want to be more specific. Something that can be good, right, regardless of any end goal. It's just good.
No, I think good is tied up with goal.
Goal. Okay. I completely agree. So in a sense, this is why.
That's why the religious goal in Christianity is the establishment of the kingdom of heaven.
Yeah, the goal is pure creation. So if the goal is pure creation, and creation is what is valued, and creation is what is good, then there has to be
Heaven on
something
earth.
innately there.
It's goal dependent.
Okay, right.
And so it's in
You're trying
reference to
create
a goal.
things that aren't going to be
So-
innately
Or the goal would be the
destructive,
imitation
that
of
won't
Christ.
Someone's
cause
goal, right, can
other
be
destruction.
something that doesn't
Something that's
encompass
innately
being in
created,
congruence
something
with
that
God or
is
being
new.
with God.
No, the
Can that be
thing
true?
that they want to be in
Oh,
congruent.
right, okay,
Hang
it
on
is
a-
God.
That's why,
That's right.
Sorry,
That's
sorry,
right.
I
That's
corrected
good. That's
myself.
great.
New-
The thing they want to be in
New things, whether you call those inventions, are valued so highly is because that they are innately creative. They're pure creation, essentially. That's why it says sing a new song unto the Lord. Is not sing the same song I've heard 1,000 times. It's because pure creation, new creation is what's valued by the Lord.
congruence with is fundamentally equivalent to their God.
So what makes someone a Christian and what makes someone not a Christian? What makes like that's what I'm trying to figure out because
That's a good question.
yes.
Yeah, well,
Thank you.
probably the deepest answer to that is willingness to shoulder your cross voluntarily and trudge uphill regardless of circumstances.
Okay, so someone can have a God because in your definition, your first preference, that is God, right? So someone can believe in God, right? And not be a Christian, right?
Yeah, well, there's a statement that Christ makes in the Gospels. He says, not everyone who says, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven.
So not that they're even saying that they believe in God, but they
I
just...
know, but that's why I'm saying this to you, is that Christ himself points out.
It's not about living, it's not about believing in a God, it's about living a godly life is essentially what they're trying to come up with. Is that if you innately know that there's a God and you try to put him above everything, is that all that matters? No. No, it's not. Living a godly life is what would make you like seem Christian or whatever else. It doesn't really matter. Sound uncertain when I answer what makes you Christian. Yeah, him answering he's trying to understand what is the definition of Christian, because most of the time people don't even put him in that boat. Because like, what is Christian? Like, what does it even matter? Like, are you talking follower of Christ? Like, what is the definition? What's the definition of Christian? And if that's the case, it's like, well, what is the goal here? Are we supposed to live a Christ-like life, or like, what are we defining it as? Because most Christians or most Catholics, whatever you want to call them, don't live a godly life and don't live like Jesus. They understand him as a person and understand a being, and they do their form of worship, which is often chanting the same songs and hymns and whatever else, and not actually going out to seek the full understanding of what God is and living a godly life. They just don't care, or they think it's irrelevant.
That there's a difference between people who say they believe and people who act it out. And the fundamental issue is the action rather than the stated belief.
But he also says that, to be saved, right, you must believe God has died for your sins or that God has resurrected in some way. So it's like, I don't necessarily think that we can take from the Bible and say that like acting in accordance with God necessarily means
This is all that all of you that believe in my word and do that I say or has been done shall enter the kingdom of heaven. Well, essentially, what Jesus was trying to do is like teach, live like me, or do as I have done, and you will enter the kingdom of heaven. He's showing us to live like Christ is what God intends. It's simply put as that, even to the point of death.
acting in accordance with, the principles of God. Like, for example,
Metro. Here's another thing, too. It does not matter, essentially. Essentially, it doesn't matter. Lesbian, gay, bi, trans, questioning, whatever else. Innately, it doesn't matter. The reason why people come to a position where they believe this to be innately wrong or believe it to be a sin is because they believe it to be self-destructive. And it's against creation is the kind of the main argument, is that you can't create life through that, which agreed. That's like, it is whatever. They understand that. Like, that's not an issue. what is the problem with loving someone and coming to a position that is innately constructive or innately good? I have not seen any argument against it unless it is self-destructive. Unless you're doing things that you know are wrong within that relationship and you feel bad for it, or unless it is actually destructive to yourself. That's the only ways that I've seen that there is an actual wrong with it. And so many Christians and so many Catholics, so many religious figures don't want to argue one way or the other. I think the hardest argument against the LGBTQ is the fact that it does not value creation. Because if you have same sex, that you can't procreate. Which is not necessarily an issue. Like, you still can procreate, just not with your spouse. And some of it, and a lot of what is said in the Bible, they say it's unclean, and the reason they say it's unclean is because they had many diseases that would be spread, especially when they're talking about pigs. Pigs are very dirty animals. That's the reason why they say in the Bible they can't eat pigs, they can't eat a lot of these other creatures because they cause diseases. That's what they're talking about. They're not talking about like, oh, you shouldn't do this because it's wrong. They're talking about it's quite literally something that could kill you.
Sacrifice, like you talk about, means that you are Christian. I don't see how you can get that from that interpretation and then, kind of justify it as the truth.
I don't think that the fact that you sacrifice is sufficient to make you Christian.
So can we repeat once again what you believe makes someone Christian?
There's many things, but one of the most fundamental is that you believe that the cosmos itself is founded on the principle of voluntary self-sacrifice. Best founded. Let me offer you a contrary example. So I could assume that power rules. And so that my assumption would be, if I can make you do it, I win. Right, and I can found a whole society on that, and that happens a lot, by the way. And that's also how societies tend to degenerate. And so that would be a society that was founded on the principle that...
You're talking about the destructive inclinations of a subset of a destructive power. So if you create something that is innately wrong or convoluted or has an issue with it, that has some form of itself that is destructive, it will cause its own destruction. That's why a lot of times when we see these other gods of the Bible, whatever you want to call them, whether they have powers of frogs or whatever else, that they cause their own destruction because they are not innately a good. There's something about them that will cause their own destruction, and God has to do nothing for them to do this. There's something innately wrong with these systems that will cause their own destruction. That's just how it is.
You get to sacrifice and I don't have to. Right. Now, the contrary to that would be something like you give up voluntarily and with courage all the things you need to situate yourself properly in relationship to the future and other people.
Right.
Right. So then there's a harmony. That's why I talked about harmony earlier.
So you navigate your life, right, in accordance kind of to this principle of self-sacrifice. Can I say it in that way?
Yes, you can definitely say it that way. That's exactly right. And navigate is the right term.
So someone does not have to have any awareness of Christ, of the story of Jesus, but let's say 60% of their actions, right, or more, whatever kind of metric you want to use, are in line with this self-sacrificial.
So the Christian thinkers of the Middle Ages dealt exactly with that problem when they were talking about the pre-Christian philosophers, for example. And they noted the similarity, let's say, between pre-Christian Greek thought and later Christian thought, and presumed that there were moral actors outside the Christian domain.
Right. So is that person Christian, though? Is that person Christian?
Well, to some degree, again, that's a matter of definition, because they wouldn't be...
If you live a godly life outside of God, are you still Christian, or are you still doing something that is right? And I think that answer, especially because he talks about like 60% or whatever else, is not a measure of percentage or of how often, whatever else. It is either you will be completely pure and knowing towards where God was, or you will have something that's innately destructive or a part of yourself that's innately destructive that will cause your own demise.
Proclaiming Christian propositions, but they're acting out the pattern. Right. So so you imagine that full Christianity would involve a dozen things, and you can imagine someone who knows nothing of Christianity.
I also would propose the issue here, Metro, is that any one sin is not valued over another. So who are we to judge? Who, like, I always go to the point, and it's like I kind of laugh at myself. I'm like, who am I to judge another? For I stand here and on a non-perfect man. That's why, like, it's not that I don't care. It's that I want people to do something that is productive and valuable to them, and that will not cause their own demise and will not cause them harm. And if that's what it is, and that is the best thing for them, even if it's, especially if it is a loving relationship, then there is nothing in my heart that I can find that is wrong with that. And even if I ask God, like, what is wrong with that, I can't get an answer. There doesn't seem to be an answer. So that's why I answer the way
Kennedy say acting out 8 of them.
Right.
Right.
So
then they'd be 8/12 Christian or something like
8/12
that.
Christian.
Well,
but to be like a full Christian, how can someone
you
say
do
I am
realize that I also come to the
Christian?
position
Like
that there
I
is
am
no
Christian,
hell.
not 8/12, but Christian.
well,
wanna
I
understand.
hesitate to do that personally because I think
There's
it's
no
the
way
kind
to
of
hell.
goal that you be very careful about proclaiming. The technical.
But belief is not necessarily, to be mostly Christian, belief is not necessary. 8/12s or, right?
Well, it depends on what you mean by belief. See, because I would say that acting out.
I actually propose a situation in where I can explain why there is no hell. It's not innate, even a part of God. If you believe God to be an all-powerful, all-just, all-knowing God, there cannot be a hell. It's not even that there is or there isn't. There cannot exist a hell because all exists within God. It is a closed unit. It is all God. All energy, all being, all matter is God. And if all needs to return to God, then there cannot be a hell. There can't be. Unless what you're proposing is that there needs to be an equal and opposite destruction to the creation, in which for an eternity there needs to be an all destructive force as well as an all creative force. But if that's the case, what is the point of the destructive force if not to remove the creative force and go back and forth? Well, if that's the case, if there's an all powerful, all destructive force, there's nothing for it to destroy because it is separate from God. So if there's nothing for a destructive force to destroy, then there is nothing there. There's nothing left. So if that's the case, all transfigures and all transforms back into pure energy and goes back to God. Like, in both situations, you come to a point where there has to be no hell. Hell is a temporary area. It's a waiting place until God returns, in a sense, and all is transfigured into God again. Going against Fincher saying hell is a thing. I'm saying hell outside of Earth is not a thing. Hell outside of time. Hell with God. There's no hell with God. There's only a hell with there being a time, and there's only a devil with there being a time. Anything outside of this realm that we call Earth is good. There cannot exist a devil outside of what we have here.
The pattern is the deepest form of belief. Now, you could add to that what you say. So, maybe in the optimal situation, how you act and what you imagine and what you say, they're the same, right? But you can imagine a hypocrite who says all sorts of wonderful things and does nothing, and you could imagine another person who acts in a very positive manner but proclaims nothing.
So what I'm kind of seeing is like a descriptive, a really comprehensive but descriptive analysis of human action, human thought, and by which we can characterize people and put people in boxes. But I don't see
why in boxes.
Yeah.
Like, when I say in boxes.
So it's the same position that I came up with earlier. Is that it'll be burned like chaff. It's the same thing as burning off the impurities. It's any portion of you that is not of God will be transfigured, will be burnt, and turned into something else, whether that be energy or whatever else it is, and returned to God. It's this this burning to make things pure again. It's the same thing you do when you light gold on fire or things like that, or even burning the weeds. That energy is not destroyed, whether you believe it to be or not. It is transfigured into something else, whether it be smoke, energy, heat, whatever else it be. it's not innately bad. If we believe it to be bad, then yes, of course, it's bad. But if God is the truth, and He knows what is good and what is bad, I am not here to judge whether that is good or bad. Can't be burned off unless whole bodies goes, so you'll go somewhere else than God. No. So they were given a chance. No. PC specs. It doesn't matter.
Boxes. I mean, like, I can categorize you based on your actions, not based on necessarily what you say, but based on your actions that you are more so or less so Christian, right? Things like that, right?
So
we can categorize people as Christian.
Well, I would say more or less voluntarily self-sacrificing.
But that's also what we came to, though, is that someone can be like 60% or 70% Christian based on simply just acting in that way.
Yeah, Richard Dawkins is like
your soul is innately good.
I watched that debate.
Let's pause there. We've been voted out by the majority.
Very good.
Thank you so much.
Really, very thoughtful.
But I don't believe that to be the case.
Hey, Dr. Peterson.
How are you doing?
Danny, nice to meet you.
What's your name?
Danny.
Danny.
You're saying atheists worship things or people or places, whatever. Can you be very clear about your definition of worship again?
Attend to, prioritize, and sacrifice for.
Okay, that's it. That's your understanding of worship.
Well, I could flesh it out, but that'll do for the time we have.
Okay. Do Catholics attend to Mary?
Well, yes.
Okay. So do they fit that description of worship?
Yes.
So you would say Catholics and other people that revere Mary, like the Eastern Orthodox tradition, worship Mary.
Well, they might not put her in the highest
But
place.
you would put it that way.
No.
You just said it. Now you're taking it back
There's
now?
still a hierarchy.
Okay, there's a hierarchy, but within the
There's something at the top.
All right, you can worship things
Mary
below.
is quite a ways up the hierarchy, but not at the top.
Let's go over your definition of worship again. What's your definition of worship?
Attend to.
Attend to.
Prioritize.
Do Catholics
sacrifice for.
What do Catholics attend to? Do they prioritize Mary over all other human beings?
No, I didn't say overall, did I? I didn't add that to my definition.
You understand?
I said there was a hierarchy as well.
You attend to
So you can attend to something trivially, or you can attend to it deeply.
Okay, now you're adding stuff to the definition. But your original definition...
I added the hierarchy part at the beginning.
Are you
just didn't understand it.
Are you familiar with the Immaculate Conception?
Why is that relevant?
Because you go to a Catholic church, don't you? Or you've attended recently. You're interested in Catholicism, aren't you?
Sure.
All right. Are you familiar with their doctrines?
Somewhat.
Okay, you're
Their
familiar.
doctrines are very
How do they
deep.
regard Mary?
Why are you asking me that?
Because you're a Christian.
You say that. I haven't claimed that.
Oh, what is this? Is this Christians versus atheists?
I don't know.
You don't know?
Time that he was Christian. He was asked to go on this. They put a title on this.
Know where you are right now.
Don't be a smartass.
Well,
and I mean
either you're a Christian or you're not.
I won't talk to you if you're a smartass.
Either you're a Christian or you're not. Which one is it?
I could be either of them, but I don't have to tell you.
You don't have to tell me. I was under the impression I was invited to talk to a Christian. Am I not talking to a Christian?
No, you were invited to.
I think everyone should look at the title of the YouTube channel. You're probably in the wrong YouTube video.
You're really quite something, you are.
Aren't I? But you're really quite nothing. Right? You're not a Christian.
Okay, I'm done with him.
Again, what are you trying to defend? He's just bullying him at that point. Like, what is the whole point of that argument? He's basically saying that he has never defined himself as Christian. He's a God-fearing or worshiping man that seeks truth. He'd never claimed himself to be Christian because he doesn't want to be put in a box that it has the same understanding and same beliefs as set religion, because set religion is not oftentimes true. We have human error all the time, always. I just don't know where he's even going.
Hi there.
Hi, nice
What's
to meet
your
you.
name?
Gerard.
Hello, Gerard.
Nice to meet you, sir. So you've said that worship is when you prioritize and sacrifice for something, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
But there's a hierarchy in there.
Sure.
Pretty much.
So I prioritize and sacrifice for my wife more than I would prioritize and sacrifice for a random person on the street, right?
Probably, yeah.
Presumably. Do I worship
I don't know.
my
I've
wife?
seen some pretty bad marriages.
Assuming a good marriage, are you saying I worship my wife?
I'm trying to define worship.
Well, that's what I'm asking. So prioritize and sacrifice. I do
the
those
higher
things.
it is in the hierarchy, the more what you're doing is akin to worship. But even in your trivial acts of attention, you're prioritizing and partaking in worship, even if you don't know it.
So I am
And it's
prioritizing.
partly, well, with regard to your wife, say. So why do you value your wife? You do value your
Yes,
wife.
I love
okay.
her, so I
Right.
prioritize and I
Okay.
sacrifice for her.
Right. So that's within the confines of love, let's say.
Sure.
What else does it serve?
What else does what serve?
Your love in your marriage.
I mean, I am married to my wife because I love her. That's
Yeah.
also why I prioritize and sacrifice for her. I certainly wouldn't think I worship her, and I don't think anyone else would make that.
All right.
I'm
Are you
trying to
making
make
that
a
claim?
definition.
Okay.
Yeah, that there's a hierarchy of attentional priority, and as you move up it or down it, depending on whether you think about it as a
You could be
pinnacle or a
subservient,
foundation,
have
you move
worship
more
levels of
towards
yourself
worship.
above
Right,
your
so
wife
even
or
the
whoever
small
else.
things,
And most likely
give you an
this guy
example.
does.
Imagine you go on a
Doesn't
date.
make a difference of whether it
Well,
matters.
imagine that your aim is a long-term relationship like a marriage. Okay, now imagine that your aim is short-term sexual gratification. Your pattern of attention is going to vary during the date, depend on your ultimate end. That's the hierarchy. The way that you attend to your wife is dependent on your ultimate aims, even if you don't know it.
So at what point is it worship? Because it sounds like you're saying
It's
worship is almost a
shades.
spectrum, right? Or it's not a binary. It's not a.
It's kind of like, that's a good
So
question.
when
It's like,
when is it worship as opposed to just I love?
And this is why I don't like the word worship. It's because it is so easily dispositioned as, well, am I praising them? Am I putting them above everything else? Like, what is true to be worship? We're out of focus. Anyways, what I believe is that you shouldn't worship anything. You shouldn't put anything above anything and have all reasonings and all anything out the window to put worship. Like, this is everything above all, and that is what I'm doing. That's why I don't like the word worship. It doesn't explain things well. What you should do is live a godly life to praise the Lord. I like the word praise way better because it actually shows what you should be doing. And yeah, everybody worships something, whether you worship your phone, drugs, alcohol, your significant other, whatever you want to say. Yeah, you worship something. But actually living a godly life, actually being subservient of rules and something that's guiding who you are to do like a certain good or a certain thing, then this word worship doesn't really have any meaning. And that's what the issue is with worship. Hello, Emily.
My wife.
the closer you get to the top or the bottom, the more it's more like
How
worship.
close to the top? Because I don't think I worship anything. And if you're saying I have to hit a certain threshold for it to be worship, it is possible I don't worship anything then, right?
The worst definition.
It's not possible that you don't worship anything.
What do I worship?
Because you wouldn't attend. Well, love.
So you think I
apparently.
worship love?
Do you attend in
I've hated
consequence
the
of
word
love?
worship, like,
See, I'm trying to
last couple
define
months,
something.
I
What
was
do
like,
you
why do we
mean
use the word
worship?
worship?
I told you what I meant. What do you mean?
So I mean, something you worship is something that you have a reverential view for in a manner in which you
The
believe.
way worship's used is something that you idolize, essentially. Something that you would put on a pedestal and like, I have all respect and all garner towards this no matter what. And I don't think that even God needs to be idolized. I think what God needs is for us to live a godly life to praise him. It's just
Believe it to be above and beyond normal things you like you.
So do you
presumably
have
worship
that
God.
attitude towards your wife?
I have that
Do you
attitude.
privilege her compared to other women?
Of course, I privilege her compared to
Okay.
other women, but I don't worship her. Nor does she worship me.
By the definition you just offered, yes, you do. Because you just offered a definition that involved prioritization and elevation.
Well, and thinking that she is divine above and beyond what a normal natural
women.
phenomenon can be. Not other women, no, beyond any human being could ever be. I will prioritize her over
See,
any
you're
other
making
human, but I
the
don't
assumption.
think that she is some
You're making
supernatural
the
being.
assumption that only the thing at the top or the bottom has anything to do with worship. And I'm saying that's not true. It's a hierarchy of prioritization. And there's either something at the top or the bottom, depending on the metaphor, or you're fragmented and confused. Those are the only options.
So let's say
you're
I'm
either going in many directions,
Okay.
or you're going in one direction.
So let's suppose I'm fragmented and confused. Then you
Yeah.
agree I don't worship anything.
No, then you'd worship multiple things.
So what's the threshold when it's worship, right? I prioritize a lot of stuff.
I said that the closer you get to the pinnacle, or the
How
closer
close?
you get...
Can you give me some sort of metric? How close do I got to get to this pinnacle?
Do you know the difference between cheap literature and deep literature?
Yes.
Okay, that's the same issue. And how do you distinguish between them? What's the difference between cheap and deep?
I mean, it's really an opinion-based thing, right?
Is
I mean,
it? So it's just an opinion that
plenty of-
Dostoevsky is better than a porno magazine.
Well, I've spoken to people who think To Kill a Mockingbird's cheap. It's one of my favorite books. So, I mean, people will differ on
Well,
opinions.
just because people are stupid about things doesn't mean that their opinion is valid.
That's certainly true.
Well,
I do
let
agree
me
with
ask
it.
you.
I agree with that.
Okay, well,
Yeah,
do you
there's some
think there is a
innate truth
hierarchy
to
in literary quality?
I think that there is a hierarchy to an extent in literary quality, but I think once you get to a certain threshold, it is just opinion. Like, I agree. Dostoevsky
Okay.
is better than a porno mag, but is F. Scott Fitzgerald
Why do
better
you
than
think
Ernest
that?
Hemingway? I don't know.
Yeah, fair enough. Why do you think that?
Because of what a book is, what literature is, Dostoevsky, he follows what literature is the purpose of more than the porno magazine
Okay,
does.
good. Well,
So it's about purpose and
let me.
definitions.
Yeah, sure. Let me give you an analog then.
Okay.
The depth of worship is analogous to depth of literary significance, and the closer you get to what's deep, the more religious and worshipful your practice.
So to
and
use
maybe you
your
don't know what's at the bottom, but something needs to be, or you're confused.
Well, so to use your analogy, then how deep do I have to go for it to be worship? Do I have to be Catcher in the Rye? Do I have to be War and Peace? Or
Depends on what.
is
It depends on
Twilight
what
enough?
you're seeking for.
I'm seeking to know whether I worship something. You've claimed I worship something, and I
If
want
you
to
want to
know.
have a deep and meaningful life, then you have to go all the way to the bottom or the top. And insofar as you're capable of doing that, because otherwise you'll be fragmented and miserable and anxiety-ridden and hopeless.
So I have to worship something to have a meaningful life. And if I
There's
worship
no
multiple-
difference between those two things.
Okay.
They're the same thing.
So if I don't worship anything, my life will not be meaningful, correct?
Well, that's the definition of nihilism.
Okay. So if I'm a nihilist, I don't worship anything.
That's true. And then you.
Oh, okay. You just said everybody worships something. I think you've just agreed there is a class of people that doesn't.
Well, they're incoherent in their worship, and hand gestures like that aren't going to help.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Look,
They're
if you're
incoherent.
incoherent and fragmented and aimless, which is what happens if
they go
your
so far off
objects of
into
worship are
areas that don't really
unstructured and
matter,
chaotic, then you're going to be
again, they keep
anxiety-ridden
coming up
and
with
without hope.
subjective truth
That happens.
versus
That's a
trying to find
technical
the
argument.
But there's happy
It's
nihilists.
not a debate.
Oh,
It's-
there
How
are.
do you
they?
explain that there are happy nihilists then?
debate
Because
Well,
you just said they
the
can't
mere
be.
fact
an
that you
understanding
state
of
that there are
some
happy
truth.
nihilists doesn't make it true.
And-
Like, what's
and
your
the fact that
evidence?
is
That
not
how do you
trying to get
measure
to some
nihilism, and
truth
how have
or
you
trying
associated it with
to
happiness,
get
and
to
what's
some
your definition of
understanding.
happiness, and
just
have you
right.
compared them
That's
to
all this
religious
is,
people?
right?
Because if you do, by the way, it's clearly the case that religious people over the long run have better mental health.
think
It's a
one guy actually
well-documented
had a
fact
debate.
in psychological
was actually trying
literature.
to get to
Sure.
So your claim is just a claim. It doesn't stand on anything.
So you disagree with the claim that there exists even one happy nihilist?
I
You would
didn't say that.
Okay, would you agree there exists at least one happy nihilist in the universe?
It's not a question that has any meaning as far as I'm concerned, because it
Okay.
depends on what you mean by happy, and it depends on the duration that you're trying to calculate over. Now and then there's probably some deluded soul who thinks he's a nihilist who's momentarily pleased with himself. But
Okay.
as a long-term strategy to deal with the future, to get along with yourself and with others, it's sadly lacking. That's why Nietzsche warned that when God died, as he announced in 1850, that people would be flooded with pointless, anxiety-ridden, hopeless nihilism. And that was what would attract them for example, to the false gods of totalitarianism, which is exactly what happened, because everybody worships something, even atheists who think they don't.
Aren't there unhappy Christians or
course
devoted
there are.
believers? So worshiping something is neither sufficient nor necessary for happiness then?
Well, terrible things can come your way regardless, and that does
Okay.
happen, but it's the case that even when circumstances become
if you
deeply
understand
troublesome,
reasons
that
for things versus
how you're
not
oriented makes a big difference.
you're
So
gonna
I'll give
react
you an
to it
example. So the book of Job deals with the issue of unfair suffering. So Job is a good man
Also, you believe
who
it
has
to be
every
Job's suffering was completely fair. And I believe that if he had the proper understanding after what happened, then he would
everything
totally
taken
agree
away
with
from him in the most painful possible way.
To settle a bet, right?
With Satan,
Yes.
yes. And so he makes
and God's not settling a debate or bet with Satan. God is all powerful. Whatever else, God knew that there's something innately wrong with Job, and it's the fact that he had an ego. He basically thought himself to be at the same level or understanding of God, and God, with one of his kind of testing things, said, "Hey, we're gonna go through this and destroy certain things in his life, and test these things and see if he is truly good." God bless you. Appreciate you, Echo. Yeah, God made Satan. God made a destructive force to be able to test things, and one of the things that he's trying to portray is the fact that there was something innately wrong with Job, whether we wanted to believe it or not. And it's the fact that he had an ego. He wanted to believe himself to be at the same understanding or ability of God. And that's why he had to plead with him and try to understand all this. But once he finally came to the understanding that, oh, okay, I am not to the same level, but I still do believe and trust in you, that he was able to get everything that he had before as well as more, because he got through this barrier of himself that didn't realize that he was still needing to be reliant on God for his understanding and for his actual truth.
Axiomatic presumption that he won't lose faith in himself or in the spirit of being itself. And that helps him remain calm and forward-looking through his time of trial.
Doesn't he absolutely curse God?
No. His wife tells him to do that.
No. Again, he does not curse God. He has great tribulation with God. He has great torment. He tries to basically ask him, why God, why God, why God? That's all he does. Like, if you read the book of Job, it's a great thing to understand, is that the whole point of it is that Job had an ego. He had something that he needed to get rid of. And God helped him with that by removing everything from him. The only way to remove the ego, remove the true self, is to come to a realization that you have nothing left but God, and to still choose to accept that as the truth, that God is all that is there and all that you need. And then moving forward from that, what you need to do is to remain in a godlike state, being able to create and do things that are of God, to be able to return to a state that was
My final claim is that atheists accept Christian morality, but deny the religion's foundational stories. Hi there.
It's very nice to meet you.
What's your name?
I'm Ian.
Hi, Ian.
Yes. So God says that you can own people as property. He says that you can beat them with a rod too. He commands genocide in Deuteronomy, in Numbers, and in Samuel. I mean, they have a goddamn baby barbecue in Numbers. Like, is all of this in line with Christian ethics?
No.
So then God doesn't fit within Christian ethics.
Well, the biblical library
proposing them to be something that is innately of God. You got to understand context.
Is a continuing story, and everything written in it has to be contextualized by the entire text. There's 65,000 hyperlinks in the biblical text. And you can take pieces of it out of context and criticize them, and that's what you're doing. But that's a mistake. I think it's an analytic mistake because you're putting the cart before the horse.
I really don't think so. I think that if we say that something is Christian ethics, then I think that all of the books essential to Christianity would fit with it, especially if it's like the main character. When we're talking about
how do you deal with
God,
the morality of war?
So
how do you think you should deal with the morality of war?
Sure. Because I feel like the morality, like I feel like Christian ethics, like this is kind of, I guess I just think it's like kind of an absurdity to say that God doesn't fit within Christian ethics. But sure, well, we can go on my ethics. That's totally fine.
I don't know what you mean by an absurdity. What game are you playing with?
Well, I just think that it's an absurdity to say that the Christian God doesn't fit within Christian ethics. That like the Christian God isn't like Christian ethical.
I said that the specific statements that you made don't take the context of the stories into account, and so that your analytical approach is faulty.
Sure.
Don't put words in my mouth.
Sure, then let's go through the example. Yeah, so, and I apologize. So let's go through the example. So in 1 Samuel 15:3, God says, go and slaughter the Amalekites, slaughter the men, the women, the children, the infants. What's the justification for that? Is that in line with Christian ethics?
That's a good question. I don't really know what to do with the terrible, blood-soaked, saturated history of the human past. I don't know. And I don't think anybody knows. I mean, what you try to do in your own life, as far as I can tell, is to conduct yourself in a manner that makes such things much more unlikely.
I totally agree.
We're all saddled with the problem of the catastrophes that got us here, aren't we?
Yeah, but this one was commanded by God. That's the problem.
Yeah,
That's what differentiates it from anything else, is that this one, it's God saying, go and do this atrocity.
Do you think that there's ever such a thing as a righteous war?
I'm skeptical. I'm not sure. It would probably be situational.
Well, right. Fair enough.
But this
one's the situation is, It's such a tough argument because if you were to leave, say, the women or children alive, then you have prisoners of war and other issues with that. Or maybe it's something that God knows beyond anything that we know. Maybe it's a bloodline or something else that is innately wrong, distorted, something that's wrong with their psyche. Maybe there are possibly situations where these were people that were just sociopaths, psychopaths, whatever else. Like, without the context of knowing what God knew, we cannot know that if these things were said were just. We also don't know, based on the fact that the victors are the ones that write the history, if what was done was actually said to be done by God, if it was actually true. Just because something made it into the Bible, you would hope that it would be true, but you need to go with other context to see if it is actually an innate truth. And I don't know if anything that we can say was said by God is innately true, especially when it comes to bloodshed. It's tough to say.
Certainly wasn't a just war. The context for the Amalekite slaughter is that 400 years earlier, they fought one battle, which they lost, and God says, that's it, I'm going to wipe them off the face of the goddamn earth. And then 400 years later, he commands the Israelites to genocide their great-great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren. That's not a just war at all. And also, a genocide is not a war.
Well, a genocide can be a war, but...
Absolutely not. Look, the genociding of the Amalekites, the men, the women, and the infants, that's not a war. The infants aren't combatants.
Look, I already said that it's very difficult to look at the blood-soaked past and to know exactly what to do about it. The answer I gave to the gentleman who is sitting here before you is that it's necessary to read a text like the Bible at all of its levels of analysis simultaneously. And there is a directional morality that emerges across time that has its roots in the Old Testament, for example, with its restrictions against murder specifically, that makes itself manifest in the
Christian is an unjust killing. So if there is a reasoning for a killing, whether it be something that is innately wrong with a person, something like them attacking you, trying to kill you, that is not considered murder, even in the Bible. It's these wars and whatever else. In a sense, most of those killings and deaths are not considered murder, even in the Bible's sense, because there was something or some precision that caused them to be in a position that was away from God, destructive, whatever else.
In texts as the insistence on voluntary self-sacrifice as the foundational belief. That's a profoundly anti-violence ethos.
Do you have the belief in your theology?
Well, what do you think of that? Wait a sec. Now, redress what I just said.
So I'm about to address it, but I'm addressing it with a question. Do you think that God is by his very essence perfect?
You'll have to provide more.
Sure, just like maximally great in all like the great making qualities.
Sure.
Yeah, like flawless. Yeah. So,
okay,
so does a flawless thing change? Does a flawless thing reveal like more and better information over time, or would a flawless thing say, here's what's good, here is the absolute good thing to do at all circumstances in time?
Well, we know some of that.
Wait,
Tell
so
the truth. That's one.
If you knew everything, you would know what to do. He's trying to argue, is a flawless God going to set a system in place that is not innately flawless or seems like it wouldn't be flawless? And innately, yes, the system seems so wrong and seems so impure, but that whole thing and the reasoning for it is to be able to test yes, no, good, evil. Because if you knew everything, for one, you would know everything that you need to do. Therefore, you just do it, and like there'd be no real like self-choice. You wouldn't have any choice. Like you just have to do things. That, and you'd also, if you like absolutely actually knew everything, you'd have decision paralysis. You wouldn't know what to do because there would be too much to do. So in removing so much information from itself and limiting it to just a body and just a soul, you're able to come up with a position where you can test good versus evil, actual, like, what should I do now, this versus that. Because if you were to leave all the, like, knowingness and, like, all the, like, yes, this is good, then you just have a system of worker bees that do exactly what you tell them to do. That's also why the Tower of Babel fell, is because God can create everything as a singular unit if he wanted to. That's not the point of this test, is not to test one thing at a time, is to test everything in every subjective sense, everything all the way around at the same time. Because otherwise, what's the point of anything?
That's totally fine, but presumably...
No. You don't get to skate over that. That's totally fine.
It's a straw man of my position. It's a straw man of the argument. So
In what
the
way?
argument is that God...
Wait a sec. You said find one maxim that's transcendent across situations.
I didn't say any of those words. I'm not sure what conversation you're a part of.
Don't be a smartass.
I'm sorry.
Seriously. I mean it. If we're going to have a serious conversation, conduct yourself properly. Okay. Rephrase your question so that, because I must have missed it. I tried to answer it.
So in my mind, I guess by my lights, a perfect being doesn't change. A perfect being, if they're maximally good, maximally more...
You're trying to understand the ability for God to release more and more information, and he's saying that a perfect God never changes. God has never changed. The reason why we're getting access to more and more information and more positive or more morality doesn't come from God changing. It comes from us changing. It comes from us understanding a higher realm or a higher level of understanding. It doesn't come from God releasing more of that or anything like that. It literally comes from us being able to understand more because we have more technology, more whatever else, more knowledge, more literature, whatever it came up to be able to evolve and understand at a higher rate.
Does our understanding of the perfect being change?
You're like
our understanding might, but presumably what the perfect being is revealing...
Well, I agree. How do we distinguish between that, though, at the human level?
How do we distinguish between whether...
Between our transforming understanding of perfection and perfection itself.
But between our...
we can only see through our own lenses.
Presumably a perfect being would be revealing all of these aspects all the time, especially if God's outside of time. I don't know how a God who's...
Revealing all these aspects is because you believe yourself... You believe that God will just like drop in front of your laps. It's not going to happen. Like I said, like I was saying, is that our understanding of God comes from us. It's not God dropping it on us. It's us being able to evolve and understand things more. It's not coming from him being able to just release information as he wants.
Who's outside of time is revealing different things at different times. That just seems like incoherent to me.
Imagine something that's perfect.
Sure.
And complete.
Sure.
Okay, and it's trying to communicate with creatures who are...
Atheists versus Christians. So it was 20 atheists versus Jordan Peterson. And pretty much everything that's argued on the atheist side is purely subjective truths. And Jordan Peterson is trying to argue a objective truth.
Or anything but that.
Sure.
Well, they're going to get it wrong.
Sure.
Okay, now wait a sec. Do you blame that on the interpreters or the phenomena itself? Like, for example, are you perfect in attending to your conscience?
Hold on. At the point in time when God is literally the one who created us, he could have created us in a way where we would always be receptive to these principles, where we don't...
If you're always receptive to certain principles, then you act no differently than a set program. There is no meaning to a set program. There is no differentiating factor, so there is nothing that's created nor destroyed. And if nothing's created, then you can't actually have a system that the whole purpose of it is to have pure creation, which is what God is trying to do.
Have to go across like a learning curve where, you know, maybe we'll understand like thousands of years into the future, maybe we'll do it. Oh, also, if you believe in an all-knowing God, then free will is impossible because
if you believe in an all-knowing God, free will is not impossible because an all-knowing God is not enacting full power over a set system. He's allowing full ability for creation and ability to do this, that, and the other. And that's why we have this evil. That's why we have all these destructive forces in our lives, is because people can choose to exploit and steal and kill and whatever else. Like, we have the ability of choice. It's quite the opposite, especially if you believe in an all-powerful God. Because if you don't, then anything that happens like this would be without meaning. Like, well, if we're just killing each other, this, that, and the other, exploiting each other, well, why wouldn't I just exploit everything that I possibly can? And then some people would argue, well, you might go to jail. There's ways to do that without going to jail. And people do it all the time. But I don't see those things as innately true or innately good. And nor does most people, so that's why they hate people that do that kind of stuff.
Let's not go to that
because
yet.
you threw free will into the mix.
Well, that was the answer to your question.
Yeah, and
you
I'm
said,
saying
why
that's
wouldn't God?
incoherent.
Well,
It's
1,000
contradictory.
years of deep thinking philosophers would disagree with you, but
Yeah,
have
and
it your
1,000
way.
years of, or at least like the last 50 years of philosophers would disagree with you. These analytic philosophers, people like Graham Oppie make arguments about the incompatibility of omniscience and free will, that if God created this world, if he chose this world instead of that world, then he makes it.
Also, you're proposing the fact that there would be multiple universes or multiple worlds instead of one enacting test. So if you start something in time, so God exists outside of time, right? So for him, if we start it here, it also ends here, no matter like wherever here I said was the first time. And if that's the case, so both aren't all that wrong, but not right. They're both very wrong, essentially. This guy's not know what he's talking about. He's confused. Yeah, I mean, he's coming from a position of the fact that he believes that if God was an all-powerful, all-knowing being, that it would be unjust to have free will. And essentially the whole point of this test is to have free will, to test every possible outcome and how things are done, not necessarily how they will be done. Because if you're just trying to test how they will be done, then you make a system that has no free will and is innately perfect. There's nothing different from that from a computer. It's pointless.
Causally inevitable every single action that you were going to make. If he made a world where we were just electrons in love, then none of this would have happened. But by making us in
None of it would have happened, but none of it would have mattered. Essentially, you're just making computers.
this world, knowing exactly what's going to happen in the future, it makes all of those events inevitable, which means that they're all causally determined, which means that we have no free will.
If you think things are causally determined, that there's no free will, then you would believe yourself to not have free will. And if you can actually show yourself having free will, even with an all-knowing God, just because you start something means that it ends. And if a God exists outside of time, if you start something, it also ends exactly when you start it. So even if God did it as a whim, on accident, and this is one of an infinite amount of realities, because God started it, he allowed for free will until the end of it, even if he exists outside of time. However long this reality takes, it had to happen, regardless of if God knew what was going to happen right away or not. This guy here gonna make me tweak. Yeah, his hair.
If you believe in an all-good God or an all-knowing God that made everything.
Well, have it your way.
Okay, cool. So then the free will of the Odyssey fails.
Well, it fails for you. That doesn't mean you've disproved it. I mean,
Do you want to
tried
respond
to
to
make
the argument?
Yes, you tried to make a case for a.
Why are we calling this argument? Is this supposed to be a debate? I'm gonna respond to the argument. That's all people like this want to do. They want to argue. They don't want to come to an understanding of a pure truth. Everything is subjective.
Causally deterministic universe. I don't think there's any evidence for that at all.
Do you think that God could have created a different universe than the one that he created?
I have no.
I believe that God has the infinite ability to create as many universes as possible. I just believe that this realm, this existence, is one of the last ones in play, because of the way that time works for us in a very up and down sine wave, essentially, is very slow. So since this is one of the slowest transverses of time, I believe that this is one of the last systems that's actually running. I believe in the multiverse. I just believe that everything that has ever existed before is before this, and that this is the last realm of understanding and the last test that exists through time.
No idea.
Okay, so then there's going to be a double bind, right? So either he couldn't have done it, in which case he lacks a power, or he could have done it, in which case we don't have free will, because he chose this world instead of that world, making the events of this world instead of that world inevitable with his.
Chose this world versus that world. You can do both. If you're talking about an all-knowing, omnipotent power, you could have done both. So it doesn't really matter if you want to choose one or the other.
Infallible knowledge.
I don't understand where you're headed.
Which just means that the free will defense fails. Like all this, like under
Like
your
I said,
view,
if
under
you want
your
to have
view,
it
free
fail,
will.
no problem. I don't know why it's relevant to the issue we're
Do you
discussing.
acknowledge that under your view, free will doesn't exist?
No.
Oh, then do you want to respond to the argument?
you'll have to phrase it more
Sure,
clearly
okay.
so that someone like me can understand it.
Yeah, gotcha. So God already knows in advance everything that's going to happen, which means that by making this world instead of that world, everything is inevitable, which means
trying
that
to argue that if God had a set understanding of starting this existence in this realm, and he understood where it would lead to, or even the possibilities of where it would lead to, then the ability for him starting this simulation, this realm, whatever you want to call this Earth, is irrelevant in that anything that you do was innately predetermined and had no meaning. Well, if we exist in time, that this is the whole argument. If we exist in time, nothing is predetermined. If we exist in time, nothing is predetermined. Because with time, everything has to flow in a certain way. Up, down, this way, that way. Until time stops. It is not predetermined. So once God sets it in place for time to stop, after that point, everything doesn't matter. But since it was started, it had to end, yes. But if you start something in time, it is not predetermined. It is not. I mean, we can estimate where it's going to go. It's like shooting a gun through the air. Like, we can estimate where that bullet is going to hit, and even if we have every opportunity to know the probable outcome, that doesn't mean that we know exactly where it's going to land. So that's the whole point of it, is that just because you are all-knowing in the probability of what could happen, you're not all-knowing in actually what will happen, and that's why you start it. That's why you fire the gun. That's why you want to know where it's actually going to land.
that God's act of causing this world instead of that
Inevitable
world
doesn't mean determined.
It's causally inevitable if God chooses this world instead of that world.
Doesn't
causally,
make it determined.
Causally inevitable means determined.
No, it doesn't.
Inevitable does not mean that it's determined. Again, like what I was saying, just because inevitably there will be an end doesn't mean that everything that ever happened had to be predetermined. It's like watching a movie at the end. Whoever made the movie had to do to make that happen was not predetermined. They just did that. Now that you're watching it, you can actually see what happened, but that doesn't mean that whatever they did before you had to happen a certain way. No, that's what the way they chose to do it. That shows that they had free will to do it exactly the way that they wanted to do it. And then this is finally what actually comes out of it. So his argument gives the
Absolutely, yes, it does.
Well, have it your way.
Okay.
That's not the case.
Yeah, let's have it your way.
You've been voted out by the majority. Please return to your seat.
He says argument. That's not a debate. That's argument. An argument's under understanding.
Jordan, nice to meet you.
Very zippy. What's your name?
I'm Liam.
Hi, Liam. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Not too bad. I'm
Good.
surrounded by atheists.
My question to you, let me scoot in, would be, what does it mean to accept Christian values precisely, or Christian morality?
It means to aim up as hard as you can, no matter what happens to you.
Okay.
Hello. Okay. I am having a good night. How are you?
So I think that that's a very broad definition of what Christian morality is.
Yeah, but it'll come in handy at some point in your life.
Right. But I think that many different disciplines and theologies.
Well, you asked for a truncated answer. Eh?
Right.
I mean, there's other ways of representing the situation, but I wanted to give you something that was kind of foundational, briefly.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It doesn't mean it's, exhaustive.
Yeah.
I could say that you would have to believe that Christ is God and He died for your sins, right? But that's in a very difficult way to understand. That's the same claim.
Yeah. If there are other theologies and disciplines that have similar types of values, how then is that definition mean? Wouldn't those also be Christian values under your definition?
That's a good question. I spent a lot of time studying different religious systems from all over the world and found multiple interesting layers of concordance.
Right.
So, for example, in ancient Egypt, their god Horus, who was the reviving god of the totalitarian state, the corrupt he was the god of attention. Right, and the Jews hypothetically came out of Egypt, and there was crosstalk between Egyptian and Jewish foundational morality, and then that bled into Christianity. I mean, human beings all over the world have come up with moral systems that fit roughly into a pattern, and they're very usefully studied. Now, I learned a lot about Christianity by studying Taoism, for example, like a lot. So I think you can make a case that Christianity formalized the landscape of good and evil more comprehensively and in more detail than any other religious system. And I think that that's part of the reason that it defeated paganism and spread so broadly across the West and is still dominant, still understructures our culture, for example.
The way you feel about Horus or Taoism or something is how I feel about Christian morals, I think.
Yeah, but how do I feel about them?
Well, that you took inspiration from them, you learned from them. Maybe
that's a good start,
right.
You know, because I would say that actually constitutes belief. You know, like you said, well, look.
Right.
In Noah, in the story of Noah, right? Noah is inspired by the apprehension that all hell is going to break loose. Okay,
Yeah.
He regards that inspiration. As God.
Okay.
Right? And when God comes to Abraham, he comes to Abraham as the spirit of adventure. It's inspiration. One of the definitions of God in the Old Testament, unsurprisingly, given the derivation of the word, is inspiration. And so if you take inspiration from Christian ideas, then insofar as you do that, you are in fact a believer, which was my point with regards to atheists
Correct.
not understanding.
But have
what
you
they're
taken
rejecting.
inspiration from Taoism or from studying Egyptian mythology?
Definitely.
So then you believe them under that definition?
Yeah, but I've incorporated them into something I think that's more comprehensive.
Is it possible to...
So just because you believe in a certain subset or a certain religion and some of the understanding of what they believe, like what their main reasoning for it was, and you incorporate that into a larger understanding of what is true, that doesn't mean that that belief or that subset is necessarily a wrong thing to understand or wrong thing that you shouldn't believe in necessarily. Which, I mean, is a good argument.
To
like,
take
you have this
inspiration
belief
and
in
to
others.
appreciate the teachings without being a believer in their truth claims?
It depends. No, I don't think so. But I think, you see, there are different kinds of truth claims, right? There's propositional truth claims, which are the truth claims of what you say. And then there's embodied truth claims, which is the truth claims of what you do. That should be prioritized. Optimally, what you say and what you do would be brought into harmony. But I would say if you had to prioritize, it should be what you attend to and what you act first. And that's what Christ actually says in the Gospels, because he points to the Pharisees, for example, who say all the right things, but don't do any of the right things, and points out very clearly that that's not acceptable.
I don't know that the Christian morality, those principles originate in Christianity, because you brought up other things that predate Christianity that you can very closely tie connections to.
Well, I don't think they do originate precisely. I mean,
Right.
I don't think the Christian claim is exactly that they originate Christianity.
So if I'm
right?
living those values, how is it that I'm living the Christian values and maybe not the Egyptian values or something else?
Well,
that you
one
brought
of
up?
one
Pause
of
there. You've been voted out by
that
the
was
majority.
good. That was good. Yeah.
Yeah, good debate. Like that guy actually was. I respect that guy versus most of the other ones.
Hi.
Hello there.
Hi.
How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. What's your name?
I'm Kumari. So I was curious about this like Christian morality that you're talking about, because a lot of my issues with Christianity have to do with the base morality of it, specifically with like the idea of like the rapture and how we see people that aren't going to come up with us with the rapture, and that concept of heaven and hell. I don't really agree with that morality, but if you could explain that to me and how I do agree with that, I would love to like hear.
Well,
your
I
opinions.
can't explain the rapture to you because that isn't something I concern myself with, and that's more of a
That's true.
sectarian belief than something that's central to Christianity. Now, there's all sorts of evangelical Protestants who might disagree with that, but that doesn't have anything to do with me. You asked a deeper question with regard to, let's say, heaven and hell and judgment.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's a tough one, right? I mean, sin, you could put it this way, sin is what puts you in hell, right? And so then you might ask, well, how do you know you're in hell? How about you do anything to get out of it?
Can I ask you
How
a
about
question?
you know that you put yourself there?
Do you think, is sin like a part of Christian morality?
What do you mean exactly? Sin as
Like
a part?
the
It's missing
concept
the
of sin?
Okay,
Yeah.
it's derived from an archery term, and it means to miss the target, right? And so it presumes that there's such a thing as a central target, and that you can miss it in many ways. And the consequence of that will be your life will be ridden with anxiety. Your life will be pointless.
And what
People
if
will
I,
turn
like,
against you.
don't believe in sin at all?
Well, do you believe in error? Have you made any mistakes?
What if I believe that the mistakes that you make, that they're fixable, and so that no sin is finite, and that the
Well,
idea
that's a Christian belief.
of the idea of hell, I don't believe
No,
in
that's
it.
also a
because
Christian belief, by the way.
A Christian belief is hell?
No, that there's no sin that, well, there's one. The sin against the Holy Ghost is unforgivable, but that's really the sin against the process that would enable you to learn.
Okay. But there's a Christian belief that hell does exist, and if I commit sin, I'm going to go there, correct?
Yes.
So what if I don't believe in that? Like I think that when you, can I explain a little bit?
Sure, sure.
Okay, thank you. I think that when you commit sin, that it's because of a lot of environmental factors in your life, like where you were born and who you were raised by. And so there are certain things that lead you down a dangerous path. And once you are dead,
Actually, that's a great argument because, yeah, innately, when you're born, things that are put upon you cause you to sin more than others. And you have the familial curses and whatever else that can be put upon you. That doesn't innately mean that those things are always needing to stay with you or not things that you can't fix. And, well, if you don't try to fix them, then that's what's actually bad, especially if you are aware of them. You're just going to cause even more of your own destruction and terror.
I think you're kind of removed of that person. There's no, like...
There are no factors of the earth that have to. What happens after death?
Right.
So I would ask you, in these times that you've suffered terribly in ways that you thought would never end, do you believe that you had any causal role in that? Like, did you play a part in that?
In my own suffering?
Yeah.
Maybe sometimes I would say that there was a part that I played in that.
Okay,
but I
that's
also
the thing
do
to
think
find
that,
out.
I think that maybe it's like a concept of free will that I don't really believe in somewhat of free will, that I think that there are certain things in your life that lead you to do certain behaviors. And so when you commit those sins, you go to hell. I'm not too sure why you would still be reaping the consequences of that.
Like I said, I can't address that. Do you believe that you can change?
I do.
Do you believe you can change for the better?
I do.
Do you believe that when you change for the better, you abandon the things you've done in the past that weren't good?
I think that you can.
Okay. Then that's very much in keeping with Christian doctrine.
Can you explain to me how that's in keeping with Christian doctrine?
You believe
if you would go to hell for those things?
You believe you can improve.
Yeah.
Right? And you believe that if you improved, you would let go of things that were impeding you. That's a sacrifice. You believe that improvement would be
most
upward.
People don't even understand that they believe in very Christian or religious beliefs, or spiritual beliefs, even if you want to call them that, is that removing the portions of yourself that are innately destructive and living in a situation where you're more creative and more positive innately brings you closer to God and more to a godly life. So someone like this that is living that way,
believe that you have agency in that.
Godly and godly.
Those are all Christian presuppositions.
I guess maybe we have different opinions of what Christian morality is.
Yes, sounds
so
like
I think that my opinion of Christian morality is something that I don't really agree with, and maybe you would define that as like the foundations of Christianity.
Let me give you an example. So if you want to atone, which means to unify yourself and unify that with the world, then the first thing you have to do is figure out what you did wrong and admit it. That's a confession. That was good.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you too. I picked Zena because I think she asked genuine questions and wasn't trying to win.
Okay, well, hello again.
Hi there.
My claim is Jordan Peterson's framework for understanding Christianity is probably not the one that the Bible intended us to use. In regards to the way that you interpret the Bible, I don't see, you have said in some circumstances that there's not a way to kind of say whether or not ontologically the historical claims made by the Bible are true. Like, for example, the story of Cain and Abel. You've said that this story is like a meta-truth in the sense that it is it exists all throughout time culturally. And the way that you define meta-truth, I don't see a distinction between that and like a metaphor, right? But and you also said that you cannot say whether this story was true. You can say that it exists eternally, metaphorically, but you can't say that it's true. And if you can't say that there are historical facts being said in the Bible as stories that weren't really said with much ambiguity, how can we say that we can understand the Bible in the way that it's meant to be interpreted? Like, if you cannot make any claims about these stories, right? You don't know whether they're true or false. How do you know that your interpretation is the correct way?
So that's why I picked you. You ask intelligent questions.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was good. What do they say?
All right, let me kind of summarize that, because she said that in a very interesting way, and it was actually very intelligent the way she said it. What she's trying to ask is essentially, if things in the Bible you have to have a predisposition or original understanding of what they could possibly mean, and you have to come to your own understanding, then how do you know an innate truth or a self-truth? It comes to the same situation of the fact of what we explain of the Holy Spirit or the Godhead being a part of your conscious or part of your understanding of innate truths, is the fact that you can double check and cross-check back with the Bible with actually talking to God. And you can come up with actual pure truths by literally talking to the Holy Spirit and understanding what is the true meaning. Is this an allegory? Is this supposed to be more of a parable? Is this innately true? Does it even matter if it's true or not? Some things, like, if it's not going to innately change the way you or others live their lives, the real meaning or disposition of truth is not needed in some of those senses, and God just straight up will not give you an answer. He might give the answer to someone else.
By their fruits you'll know them.
It just kind of depends.
Okay.
Right. Well, so one of the things I look at is the impact of what I'm doing.
We'll join the
Right?
Discord.
And so I know a lot of evangelical Christians, a lot of Catholics, a lot of Orthodox Christians, a lot of people from other faiths. And they've told me, like many of them, that they found my interpretations very helpful and that it deepened their faith. And so that's interesting, because I wouldn't have necessarily expected that to be the case. And I've also talked to thousands of people who've told me that they came to understand the foundational stories of their culture better as a consequence of listening to me, and that they did everything they could to sort out their lives and that it worked. That's many different pieces of evidence.
So confused. Yeah, if you go through the different understandings of the Bible and actually seek truth and understanding, it will help a lot of things in your life, especially if you're reading the right parts. Ooh, did not mean to click out.
Sort out their lives and that it worked. That's
So
many
confused.
different
That's so funny.
pieces of evidence that all converge.
Yeah, if you were to read the right portions of the Bible, there's evidence that is shown that there's different portions of the Bible that will portray properly to different portions of your life. And you can answer about every question of every trial and tribulation that you have to go through in life with different stories of the Bible. Like, it is shown to help people live better lives. Like, on average, if you're reading more of the Bible, you're going to be a happy individual.
On something like the practical and conceptual utility of my approach. Now, is it the same? There is a lot of approaches to biblical interpretation historically, and what I'm doing is possibly less new than you think.
Yeah, I want to make a claim on whether this evidence is enough, right, to substantiate whether or not your interpretation is going to, be more plausible, right, be the most plausible. Because in regards
to... It's an open question.
Yeah, right.
You bet.
So in regards to how we interpret the Bible and how we see the Bible, something can add value to someone's life.
And gathered upon many different individuals, same way the Bible was. You have to cross test like literally everything possible with as much information and as much knowledge as you possibly can. That's why I talk to a lot of individuals and go back and forth. I like listening to things like this, and I have conversations with people that have opposing understandings, because I want to understand like what is innately true, and come up with that. I don't like to have arguments. I like to have understanding. So
interpretation can add value to someone's life. Interpretation can connect you to your conception of what your faith is. But if it's the quote unquote interpretation that God does not intend, that can lead to a plethora.
That's certainly the case. That's why the medieval Christians were so concerned about heresy.
Exactly.
Yeah, because they felt.
Well, that's also what they come up with is he basically says in the Bible that I would rather have you dead than have you turn someone away from God or like be teaching the wrong thing. And like it just comes to the point like how do we know that our interpretations are right or wrong? I think that we should as individuals test and see like, hey, is this person telling the truth? Is he not? And what can I do about it? Like we shouldn't believe in one thing or another based off of just what we hear. We should actually do some more research on it and come up with our own truth.
And that's why the Catholics objected so much to the Protestant Reformation, because they believed that the fractionation of Christianity would result in an indefinite fractionation, right? Well, and that's exactly what's happened.
Right.
So yeah, that's definitely a problem. I think one of the foundational principles, for example, there's a foundational principle in the Old Testament of hospitality. Right. So what you want to do if you set up your local environment properly is to make it welcoming to people voluntarily. And so one of the ways you could judge the validity of the interpretation of a classic story is whether or not that interpretation might be regarded by someone as welcoming. Does that represent something you'd actually like to have if you were acting in your own interest in the long run?
Right, and we can talk about that. Like do
protect you from fear might be another one.
Exactly. So we can talk about like
understanding of what to be true would be something that would be negative. Then what would be the points of understanding it? Essentially, is what they're coming to. And if you innately know something to be negative, like hey, this is destructive, this, that, or the other, unless you can change it, and unless there's actual importance to knowing that, then it is not a truth or not a understanding that's worth knowing, because it will not change anything for the better in your life. And that's why I think most people should avoid news and avoid situations that are negative that they have no impact on. Unless you are actively seeking out an ability to have a positive change on a situation, you should not be regarding yourself with something that is negative.
How these interpretations of the Bible, like if they kind of resonate with us. And I think that can in some case be some kind of like evidence, oh, this might be true, but I think we need to ask, is this evidence damning, right? Is this evidence certain, right? Yeah. So, but I do want to look at, again, the consequences and our understanding of this interpretation once more. So we look at, again, the story of Cain and Abel, and we say, yeah, so I believe this is a meta-truth. I believe that this story is resonant throughout cultures. That is all true and dandy, and I'm sure that there is in some way, the story was put in here for the reason, right? To tell us about, fights between brothers. But also, you can't say I do know or I don't know that this story is false or true.
You can't acknowledge that you don't know if it's false or true, because it is so old in the Bible, and it's just explaining a positive versus negative situation. Something that is destructive versus something that is creative, and the situation in which there is unfairity. Like, it is essentially setting up the ability to understand how the system works.
Ontological, historical sense, as a historical fact, were there two people like that were specifically referenced?
Okay, I don't think that's knowable, but I'm not sure why it matters to you.
So the reason why it matters to me is because we need to know how we should interpret the things that the Bible says, and the things
many ways.
Right. But like, if we interpret
sometimes poetry, sometimes history, sometimes fact,
but
sometimes
for example,
metaphor.
The reason why it's important, right, very important, is because, for example, we can talk about something like God says, I believe it's like 1 Corinthians 15:17, something about how belief in God specifically as someone who resurrected or as someone who died for our sins is important, right? But we have to look at, if we can interpret that as just like, you have to believe that God is a symbol of sacrifice. That is different from believing that there was an actual person named Jesus Christ who died on the cross for our sins. True. So if you believe one and not the other, that can be the difference between you going to hell and you going to heaven. So if we cannot make, like, we cannot say that we know whether or not certain historical facts in the Bible happen, like even as just like events, like, because the events matter, because again, God dying for our sins on the cross was an event. If we can't say that we know these things happened, these things did or didn't happen, this then leads us to kind of like the conundrum of how do we know what we are meant to believe, what the Bible intended for us to believe, and this can be very, very important to like our fate. Do you see what I'm saying?
I've got no disagreement with any of that. What sort of response do you want from that? You pushed me beyond the limits of my knowledge.
Really?
Well,
I think that's...
there's so many things you can't know. I'm struggling. I know that the biblical stories are the foundation of Western culture.
Mm-hmm.
I know that the consequence of those stories has been the genesis of a society that is in the main freer and more abundant than any societies have ever been. I don't exactly understand the relationship between those stories and that outcome, but it's not nothing.
Right.
But I don't know the answer to the questions that you're asking. You know,
Exactly.
it's the case that forever when people have been interpreting religious stories, they wrestled with exactly the question that you just described.
Mm-hmm.
When is it fact? When is it poetry? When is it music? When is it metaphor? When is it ritual? When is it time-bound?
But what I'm saying is that your interpretation of the Bible, if you cannot tell us, again, if these historical events happened or not, that can be deciding factor in if someone is like damned to hell for eternity or if they go to heaven, right? So that's why
I don't concern myself so much with that particular question. You know, like that would be something that would stem more from an evangelical viewpoint. And I'm not putting that down, by the way. I don't.
I'd say to actually have an understanding of if you're going to be damned to hell or go to heaven, you actually have to have an understanding of what that means for you and what that actually looks like. And for me personally, what I believe in is a temporary hell. It's basically a purgatory state, a state that is basically like sleep. And if the only thing that you can do is create things that are negative, you're just going to cause situations that are going to be like a hell to you. Oh, excuse me. Let's get that focus back, hopefully. But if the only thing that you are is with God, then you will become into a godly state and be able to go to heaven again. Like, that's just how it is. And then until God comes back, then anything will be transfigured or burnt, essentially. Burn the chaff. It will be destroyed in a sense, but nothing can be really destroyed. So what happens with that? It gets transfigured and returns to Christ. In my opinion,
You're asking me a question I really can't answer. I'm not claiming even that my interpretations are canonically correct. I can only tell you the consequences of having released them into the world, let's say.
Right. So I guess we've kind of come to a conclusion about that, which I've kind of wrestled with your framework and pushed it kind of to its end, at least in the way that you can answer my question. So I don't know that we can more wrestle with that.
See, I guess the problem is, you see, I don't exactly understand, I don't think anybody does, the relationship between fact and destiny. You know, well, they're different realms in a way, because knowing what the world is made of doesn't help you navigate through it. Not really. It doesn't provide you with a foundation for navigation. But knowing the facts of the world is obviously useful. And the relationship between those two things, part of that's the mystery of Western civilization and the continued competition between science and religion.
To bridge this kind of understanding between fact and destiny is like an important question that the burden is on Christianity to answer, and specifically interpretations of Christianity. And if we can't do that,
why is the burden on Christianity?
Because it posits, right, that this interpretation, right, is going to be a way to understand God. But if it's faulty,
if you're trying to argue that the burden of evidence is on the bearer of evidence, when the whole goal is not necessarily to convert. I mean, yeah, I would love for other people to understand the understanding of God as is, but you cannot force an understanding upon an individual. The whole goal is for you to interpret and understand individuals on the way that you are anyways. No wonder you only got 3 people in the stream not attacking you or anything. Nah, you're good, you're good.
Right?
That what evidence would you what evidence would you accept?
That would be an interesting question, because I've seen people try to answer the question, and I've never really been moved, because I can always attack and then kind of get to this point where the answer is I don't know.
Well, here's an answer.
Pause there.
I'm basically done here as well.
All right. Well, thank you so much for the ride.
Well, I definitely picked the right person.
Thank you.
That was very good.
Actually, that's actually the end of that. I appreciate you guys today. That is a really different subset of whatever, but I wanted to do it regardless, and I think we got it. I'll actually have the